Hello and welcome to the next big indefensible video. If you've been paying attention to my streams or socials, you might have thought the next one coming up was the huge Dustborn review I've been working on for, months now. But no, this topic is a bit more flash in the pan. You know, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. Plus, to be honest, I was just really into the whole thing. And speaking of the topic, it's Goonergate. That's hashtag Goonergate to you. Yeah, I know, I'm already really late on this one. But this time I have a good reason. I wanted to discuss what's really going on behind Goonergate, since it turns out it's actually just one story among several different stories happening right now, all across the internet, that all feed into James Lindsay's whole woke right thing. It's his view that there's a contingent of the right wing that uses the same tactics as the progressives in order to enforce moral changes in various cultural spaces. Censorship, shaming, bullying, canceling, that sort of thing. Of course, there's more to his view than that, but basically he's talking about a woke right to complement the woke left. So, my original plan for this video was to go over Goonergate, then lift the hood on the whole thing and go over Lindsay's woke right idea. After that, we'd come back to Goonergate armed with some newfound knowledge and put a few more of the pieces together. Unfortunately, as I kept researching, this was supposed to come out on the 13th after all. The woke right part of the script massively ballooned upward to like 3/4 of the whole video, and eventually I looked back and realized, oh yeah, this is a gaming culture video, not a political philosophy one. Whoops. Therefore, I've decided to spin off the woke right part of the original project into its own thing, which will come out, someday? I've already recorded it, so it would be a bit silly to let it just sit in my hard drive for months. But then again, there's at least a dozen other videos sharing the same fate currently. But hey, let's not think about that. We're here to think about Goonergate instead, so strap in and enjoy the ride. Here we go.
This attack is eerily realistic.
Everything is sexist. Everything is racist, and you have to point it all out.
There's this other YouTuber I'm friendly with named SmashJT. I've been on his show a couple times, I've talked to him in private a couple times. He overall seems to be a good guy. He was big in what the internet's now calling Gamergate 2. Yes, I know there's been like 5 Gamergate 2s over the years.
I reckon we can get Donald Trump to defend Gamergate.
No.
Why not?
But why would he, though?
This one is specifically about the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff, a controversy which kicked off back in February or March of this year. I've been on a whole bunch of streams talking about the Sweet Baby Inc. thing, but thinking back, I never actually did a video on it, despite intending to. So the very quick TLDR of that event, since it isn't today's topic, is people discovered that a very progressive consultancy company, Sweet Baby Inc., had its hands in a lot of pockets. They were brought in to work on a bunch of games across the industry, indie and AAA alike, pretty much all of which were flops. And while we can debate how much of that is due to their involvement and their politics, and how much is due to other problems at the studio, the fact remains that among your average gamer, the Sweet Baby brand became highly toxic, like LJN back during the NES days or something. Anyway, there's a lot more to the Sweet Baby Inc. story than that, but we'll dive down that rabbit hole another time. The point is, it's being called Gamergate 2 because it followed roughly the same path as the first Gamergate. A crowd of progressive activists in the gaming industry, whether that's in media or in game development, using their megaphones and their platforms to shout down gamers who are complaining about progressive politics in their spaces. And the gamers revolted against them, sparking a culture war. And just like in Gamergate 1, centrist, moderate, and nominally apolitical voices teamed up with partisan right-wing figures due to their shared objection of what they both call woke. Back during the original Gamergate, this temporary alliance began to fray at the edges around 9 months in. Right-wing culture warriors like Milo or Cernovich successfully used the controversy to establish their brands, and once the clout ran dry, they moved on into more mainstream political commentary. Guys like these never gave a shit about gaming. They saw an opportunity to grow their presence, and they took it.
There's many reasons why I opportunistically latched on to Gamergate, but feminism wasn't one of them. Feminism wasn't one of them, so try again.
This was never their community. They were interlopers in this space, offering their temporary help only because gamers could grant them relevancy in return. Meanwhile, some other individuals who genuinely did care about video games, since they were gamers themselves, like Sargon of Akkad for example, would end up slowly drifting rightward over time. Remember, Sargon was a Bernie bro back in 2016.
Progressives like this. Progressives
Look
absolutely
at
like
this
this
fucking
moment.
picture though, man. Just look at the dynamics of this picture.
Progressives like this.
It's just cancer though.
What I'm saying is that progressives agree with this. They do agree with this, and that's the problem.
Yeah, She is the epitome of a bourgeois virtue signaler. She is obviously not like from the hood. She's obviously there. I mean, look at everything about this is fake and affected. You know, hand in the air, eyes closed. Yeah, I'm with the people or something.
I always thought of myself as being left wing, but
I didn't know much about left-wing philosophy at the time, and the more I looked into it, the more I realised, oh, I'm not left-wing, and actually these people are crazy, and the world they're trying to bring into existence is probably going to be terrible, and so I think they should be stopped.
Unlike Milo or Cernovich, Sargon and other people like him were not grifters, despite the prog slandering him with that label. Rather, their experiences in Gamergate culminated in a sort of proto-how I left the left type situation, where part of it was having a more clear view of what the left was when it went mask off, and their desire to understand it leading them towards other, more right-leaning political thinkers. And where another part of it was being treated poorly by the friends and faction you used to associate with, since a lot of politics is just in-group preference in the end.
Here's me on the center left, and here's the far left person, you know, my comrade or whatever, and here's the right, and then gradually that person on the far left shouting, you know, you're a bigot, and then here's me moving to the right, and I feel that, I felt that happen, I felt that movement of like, oh, I'm not allowed in this tribe anymore.
That happened to me too.
And finally, there's the third group, the gamers who remained centrist or moderate or apolitical, who didn't appreciate the leftoids shitting up gaming with their progressive nonsense, but who also didn't appreciate the rightoids pretending to swoop in to save the day and be all buddy-buddy with them, now that their goals had temporarily aligned. There are a whole bunch of people in this camp. In fact, I'd say it's probably the majority of the normie gamers from Gamergate 1. People who aren't YouTubers, people who don't have some super big Twitter account or anything like that. Just normal, everyday gamers who don't like woke nonsense. Though back then we called it social justice. But there are definitely a few figureheads of this group too. If I had to pick out a notable figure who was active back then and is still active now, who is solidly in this third group, I'd have to say it's Harmful Opinions. From what I understand of him, he doesn't like progressive politics shitting up gaming, but that doesn't mean that he's overcorrected in the other direction and joined the rightoids. I also view myself as in this third camp as well, but nonetheless I do understand people like Sargon who have shifted rightward over time. I spent a lot of time reading right-wing political theorists just like he did. I just wasn't as convinced by them as he was in the end.
For the people who are worried about liberty and equality, well, Karl Marx has a point to them. To me, he is just another step on the path of liberalism. I don't care, I'm not for the original path. I used to be, and then I properly understood what the whole point of this was.
I lay all of this out because the same thing has happened again with Gamergate 2, and roughly on schedule as well, about 9 months after it first kicked off. And that is where SmashJT comes in. He's dubbed what's happened Goonergate in his video describing the whole situation, which is worth watching, but here's basically what went down. The first Descendant, a Korean-made looter shooter with a bunch of hot female characters in it, released a couple months after Stellar Blade, and attracted much the same audience. Like Stellar Blade, it wasn't an amazing game or anything, but it was pretty fun, and most refreshingly enough, it actually had physically attractive characters in it, something that has become less and less common in video games as time has passed. For this reason, despite the first Descendant not being a masterpiece or anything, gamers have rallied around it. So, what started all the drama? Well, this clip... okay. This clip from the latest update to the game, showing off some good old-fashioned bikini armor, went viral on social media for obvious reasons. It was posted by a fan service Twitter account with the caption, "More Luna Booty Dance." You can buy this costume and then wear it now on all characters with the new season update, by the way. It's like this for every common outfit now, listed for multiple characters. This clip was retweeted by Pirate Nation with the question, "Is this what gamers want?" going viral with 2.4 million views as of recording. And several of those right-wing creators, who had been guests on various gaming culture war-focused podcasts, who had previously broken bread with gamers over their mutual dislike of woke nonsense in video games, suddenly turned 180 on the topic of censorship. The reply that opened the floodgates on this whole shit show came from DreadRoberts, a gaming culture war YouTube channel that focuses pretty much exclusively on this sort of anti-woke stuff. In fact, did he put the Sweet Baby Inc. logo in every single thumbnail he's made? Hold on, I gotta check this out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... 49. As of recording this, he's got 49 Sweet Baby logos in a row in his video thumbnails. The combo breaks at this one here, with an angry black woman talking about Star Wars. A bunch of these games aren't even Sweet Baby Inc. games, so I have no idea what the fuck he's thinking. He tried to hide this one by putting the Sweet Baby in an assassin robe, but I caught it. Nothing gets by old Dev. Hey, is this one a Sony Baby Inc.? Anyway, let's see what DreadRoberts had to say for himself with regard to the first Descendant being the future of gaming. Take it away, Dave.
Any person with a modicum of decency would say no. This is not where the future of gaming should be headed. The constant promotion of half-naked women as the greener side of gaming is getting ridiculous, and I begin to think that these people who say they want to save gaming don't actually want to save it. So many claim to care about morals and the future generations and not giving even an inch of progress to devs who push woke ideology or whatever else, but then they'll turn around and tell young men and women to support titles that throw this stuff in your face. Most of what I've seen for months now from these accounts are butt cheeks and cleavage. Seriously, how is this making gaming better? All we're doing is pushing normies in the same direction but on a parallel track. People may argue, we just want to push back on the ugly women agenda, just trying to make a point to the lefty weirdos. Okay, so where do we draw the line then? Because there doesn't appear to be one. This is why I say that we need real adults with real ambitions and aspirations and a mature outlook on the future to lead the charge of the industry. People who have their priorities straight and their arousal in check.
So, this is a take that comes straight out of the playbook of the old Christian conservatism that gamers spent the 90s and 2000s fighting against. It's bog standard satanic panic stuff. We've all seen it before. Here are DreadRoberts' two main claims in this post. One, that half-naked women are not the future of gaming. They are indecent, and the people who promote them do not in fact want to save the games industry. And two, adults need to be in charge of the conversation. People who are mature, who have aspirations, and who keep their arousal in check. Okay, got it. By the way, just out of curiosity, back around 8 months ago or so, when Stellar Blade was the topic of the day, what do you think DreadRoberts was posting on his anti-woke gaming YouTube channel? I mean, he's got a ton of videos on the topic. What do you think his takes on that game's TNA were, if you had to guess?
So if you're anybody that knows anybody that plays video games, you probably know about Stellar Blade, one of the only games out there right now that are willing to emphasize on a woman's anatomy, try to make her look as beautiful as possible, and even revolve the Souls-like combat, from what I'm hearing, around her accentuated figure. The model, or the in-game character that was scanned after the real-life model, is being body-shamed. And the game is also being heavily criticized by you-know-who's, crazy people who just don't like attractive characters in video games.
Oh, what a different tune you had to play back then, buddy. You're out here talking about body shaming? You literally put Eve in your video in the fucking skin suit? You know, the one where she's completely naked? What about these half-naked women not being the future of gaming, bro? What happened to that?
IGN calls Stellar Blade protagonist a sexualized doll and says the creator has never seen a living woman. Guess who this is? This is the creator's wife. And guess what? She's also an artist on the game. So IGN is wrong. A pic of Ben Asola, the author of the article, seems much more likely he has never seen a living woman. I think it'd be hard to see a woman when you have those things over your eyes.
We all know what DreadRoberts is getting at? Soy boy IGN writer accuses Stellar Blade's director of never having seen a woman before, when the director's wife also worked on the game. Meanwhile, the soy boy IGN writer in question has photos of him doing childish things, and we're all here making fun of him for it? Yeah, fair enough, that's funny. But the reason that it's funny is because the game director is accused of being childish when he's not, by a man who himself appears to be childish while presenting himself as if he isn't, like he's some moral authority or something. I get the joke. It's the same type of joke that I would make. But how is this take?
Ben Asola, the author of the article, seems much more likely he has never seen a living woman.
Congruent with the whole mature adults need to be in charge of the conversation thing, DreadRoberts. Aren't you making a positive claim here in this video that the guy who made the fat jiggling asses of Stellar Blade is in fact a mature adult? How can you square that with your current anti-fat jiggling ass stance, where it's actually mature not to promote this sort of thing? These two takes don't line up.
I live alone and I'd still be embarrassed to have this on my TV. That intro sequence is so effing bad. It's just so many elements of fetishistic, infantile nonsense. I haven't been disgusted at a game in a good while. This is bad, especially given the developers themselves and the gender war in South Korea. It is just aggravating. And then this person said, agreed, I tend to be ambivalent with sexualized character designs in games, but everything about Stellar Blade is just beyond embarrassing and gross. Like, what about it?
Yeah, what about it? Oh yeah, the whole constant promotion of half-naked women isn't actually the greener side of gaming, etc, etc. That's what about it. If you were an honest man, DreadRoberts, you would have said in this video, yes, I do not approve of the sexual content of Stellar Blade either, but while for these progressives it's because it's objectifying, for me it's because it's degenerate. But he understands that would mean losing viewers. So no, instead he adopts this whole, who cares man, it's not hurting anybody attitude, knowing full well it's not how he actually feels.
I see people elsewhere being like, the sexualization isn't even that bad. There's no voyeuristic camera angles. And I am convinced I do not inhabit the same world as them. Here's my question to all of these people who are upset about this fictional video game character. What is so wrong with a woman being attractive, number one? And number two, what is wrong with men being attracted to attractive females?
I don't know, you tell me. You're the one who seems to have a fucking problem with it. Okay, let's go over my options here. I can't be woke, obviously. I can't say this is problematic or anti-feminist or anything like that. Okay, got it. I'm with you, fuck the progs. But I can't be gay either, because you're a Christian. So I've got to find Eve attractive, like any natural, straight, hot-blooded male. Understood. I'm completely on board with that too. Her ass is magnifique. But also, I can't look at her or enjoy her in that way because that's degenerate, and I need to, quote, keep my arousal in check. Oh, okay. So, I know I'm just spitballing here, I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like your position is that gamers should be attracted to women, but not actually be, attracted to women. Anyway, DreadRoberts' take earned him a whole bunch of pushback, with most rank-and-file gamers pointing out that he was simply advocating for another form of censorship. This time it was censorship based on religious Christian morality instead of woke progressive morality, but nonetheless it was still straying away from the who cares man, free speech maximalist position that he, and everyone else we're going to talk about in this video, was advocating for back during the Stellar Blade drama. Just to be clear, that who cares man, free speech maximalist position is basically one of maximum leeway for artists to create the art that they want to create, unburdened by censorship, as much as possible anyway. We will touch on the underlying philosophy of what constitutes censorship later in the video, but for right now, just keep in mind that most normal people who come from liberal, capitalist, democratic Western societies, the places we call home, operate off of a basic live and let live moral code. And when it comes to artwork, this idea is, if somebody creates art that you don't like, that's actually fine. Just don't consume it. Ironically enough, although I absolutely fucking hate Frosk for a variety of reasons, that iconic clip where she single-handedly destroyed the G4 revival, she's actually perfectly embodying this moral code.
If you don't like it, don't watch it. Peace!
Bye, Felicia.
Yeah, okay, so it didn't work out too well for her. Her snarkiness here completely demolished the entire company. But the underlying point is actually correct. Individuals should be left alone to create what they want to create, and other individuals should be left alone to consume what they want to consume. If your creation is good, it will be consumed by more people, and you'll earn more money, hopefully enough to keep creating artwork. This is what the libertarians call letting the market decide, though the market is just shorthand for a crowd of people's individual choices on what product they prefer to buy. When somebody censors an artist, when they come in and say, you can't make that artwork, that is preventing a product from being chosen by the market, by the crowd of consumers who want to spend their money. From this perspective, it doesn't matter if the art is censored for woke reasons or for religious reasons. It's still removing choice from the consumer. Not because the consumers don't want to choose it, but because the censor doesn't want the consumers to choose it.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Now, there is a counter-argument against this position, and a counter-argument for it, and we'll get to those later. But the point is, when DreadRoberts asks the question, where do we draw the line? That is a question about limiting consumer choice. And if a line is drawn, that does go against the live and let live morality, where if you don't like a piece of artwork because it's too sexual for you, you can simply choose not to consume it. It's at this point that SmashJT comes into the story. He also replied to DreadRoberts, saying, when you are becoming exactly what Smash, come on, man. When you're becoming exactly what you're fighting against, you are no better than those you're trying to stop. Dread, who had previously defended Smash during some of the earlier Sweet Baby drama, when journalists dogpiled him, responded with this.
Smash, who's apparently a married man with children of his own, seems to think that another married man with children of his own setting boundaries and having morals and values is becoming exactly what you're fighting against. Hilarious. I've been fighting against DEI relentlessly and was one of the very first people that defended when Mercante was going after his wife. Oh well, lesson learned, I guess. RIP. Incredible how my call for not taking things too extreme just to own the other side has shaken people to the core so hard that their brains have snapped in two. It's hard to believe, really.
Smash gave the normal, sane reply. Gaming is about escapism and entertainment, not morals or setting boundaries. And if a game comes out that you don't like, don't buy it. Smash might not know this in a formal sense, but he is appealing to that live and let live moral code here when he's calling for less regulation of an artistic space. And you know what? That's my position too. I don't want woke nonsense games like Dustborn to not exist. That video's still in the works, by the way. I want artists of all political persuasions to make the art they want to make, games included. I just want to be free to make fun of them if I think they're bad. If there's people out there who genuinely want to buy and play and enjoy a game like Dustborn, there's not, but let's pretend here, that's fine. That's capitalism. That's people desiring a product and other people making that product and selling it. What's interesting about DreadRoberts' second large tweet is his inclusion of Smash's family, something that the progs did quite a bit when dogpiling him back during the Sweet Baby Inc. stuff too. Another commenter pointed out the similarity, saying that bringing his wife and kids into it showed DreadRoberts to be similar to the progressives they'd all been fighting against. DreadRoberts replied by simply saying,
"You're right. I should just let him attack my character directly and call me a woke loon with a smile on my face."
Smash seems kinda incredulous here. I'm attacking you now? Which, yeah, is hilarious. As far as I can tell, Smash didn't attack him, he just critiqued him. Specifically, he critiqued the fact that he's using the same tactics that the progs use. Ian Miles Chung, who's another one of those Gamergate 1 grifters that used the movement and then discarded it after building up his brand. Though with his case, that's a bit more complicated. But we don't have time today, and frankly, that's close enough. He asked DreadRoberts the question, not every game is like this, so why let it bother you? DreadRoberts replied with,
not every game is like this, but there's a heavy push from bigger accounts towards this becoming the norm or the standard. There are plenty of reasons it bothers me, to name a few: morals, values, and children. But also, the general gaming audience doesn't desire or deserve degeneracy to be the poster child of the good guys. We should be encouraging gamers and devs to be smart, not to fall into the same extremist trap that got us into this culture war in the first place.
Don't have a cow.
Okay, there's a lot to dig into here. Firstly, when DreadRoberts says that sexual content is being pushed to become the norm, I would argue it's actually returning to the norm. My generation, the millennials, our whole thing was making the religious right wing clutch their pearls by being edgy little shits when we were kids. And the youth culture of the 90s and 2000s completely reflected this. I've done several videos on this topic before, but the TLDR is, the zeitgeist of my generation revolved around pushing boundaries, whether that was in music or in comedy or in sports, and the boundaries that were being pushed on involved stunts and pranks, gross out humor, and yes, sexual content. Basically, if it made an old fuddy-duddy gasp in shock, my generation loved it. A prime example of this is Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider series. She was absolutely considered a gaming sex symbol back in the late 90s, and everyone in gaming treated her like one. Yes, the Tomb Raider games were good, but also she had giant tits. We all knew it, and gamers really wanted that sort of thing. She was regularly paired with Tifa and lewd fan art at the time, both of them being high-profile, big-boobed PlayStation women. It's no secret that Eidos has been making Lara Croft's jugs smaller with each modern iteration of the series. Maybe it's because the games are more realistic now, so they didn't want the breast size to be completely ridiculous. Or maybe it's because there were a bunch of progressive game developers who had moved into Eidos. I don't know which it is, but what matters for this conversation is that Lara Croft is proof that gaming is not being artificially pushed in a more erotic direction, as DreadRoberts claimed it was, but rather it's returning to form. Secondly, DreadRoberts lists off the 3 reasons that this return to form bothers him: morals, values, and children. The first 2 covered a lot of the same ground. Values, morals, and ethics are all just standards of right and wrong. It's just that values are personal, morals are social, and ethics are institutional. He's basically just saying that he finds sexual content to be morally wrong, and he's saying it twice. With regards to the children thing, I get it. I think even SmashJT has stated he doesn't want kids playing mature rated games. But guess what? That's why they're mature fucking rated, dude. The first Descendant is an M-rated game. Stellar Blade is an M-rated game. These are not games meant for kids. It is the parents' responsibility to keep their kids away from these games. If your child is playing the first Descendant and getting mind-fucked by jiggling asses on screen, that's your fault, not anyone else's. Once again, this is all stuff we've heard before. I've used this legendary clip in many videos in the past to drive this point home, and it works here as well. Do you guys remember back in 2007 when the first Mass Effect game was about to launch, and Fox News ran a segment where right-wingers wanted the game to be banned from sale because FemShep can have lesbian sex with Lara in it?
It's a new role-playing video game that is leaving nothing to the imagination. Mass Effect is what it's called. It's made for Microsoft's Xbox system, and it features in some parts of this, you'll see full digital nudity. Imagine. And the ability for the players to engage in graphic sex, and the person who's playing the game gets to decide exactly what's going to happen between the 2 people, if you know what I mean. Now, the game is rated M for mature. However, critics say that Mass Effect is being marketed to kids and to teenagers. Pandora's box is open. I mean, kids have access to these things, and unless you're hovering over them every second, they're going to find ways to see this stuff on the internet. How damaging is it really?
Well, the thing is, you know, it's the whole concept of, like, 13-year-olds have never seen Playboy because they're not supposed to. It's that idea that, I mean, let's talk about who the video game is for. It might be for adults, but if you look at the statistics, who is playing video games but adolescent males, not their dads? So that's the first thing. The damage is this. We know that all the research shows that violence has a desensitizing effect. Well, sexuality does too, because this is when the developing mind is happening. This is when they're first deciding who they're going to be, who their identity is. This is when social development is happening. And here's how they're seeing women. They're seeing them as these objects of desire, as these, you know, hot bodies. I mean, they don't show women as being valued for anything other than their sexuality. And it's a man in this game deciding how many women he wants to be with.
All right, let's get Jeff in on this.
All right, that's
go ahead,
completely
Jeff.
incorrect. Yeah, it's completely incorrect. First of all, you can actually play as a man or a woman in the game. Cooper, have you ever played Mass Effect?
No.
Right. Well, I think the fact is you talked about, another thing that you mentioned is that how it's, has full graphic nudity. That's completely incorrect. There's no full nudity in this game. There's the side of an alien boob which can be seen. It's a small sexual situation in this game, which is about 2 minutes out of a 30-plus hour experience.
And yes, that's a young Jeff Keighley standing up for freedom of expression in there. Wild times, man. Basically, the whole won't somebody think of the children argument hasn't changed this entire time.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
They're your kids. You think about them. M-rated games are meant for adult audiences, and the fact that children exist and also play video games does not mean that M-rated games need to be changed. The third point, the general gaming audience doesn't desire or deserve degeneracy to be the poster child of the good guys. This kinda ties back into the first point, so we don't need to spend too much time on it. What you're calling degeneracy, the girl dancing in the thong, well guess what? The general gaming audience does in fact desire that. It's why games with sexually attractive characters are blowing up right now. In fact, I'd argue that it's progressive prudishness pushing for the desexing of culture for nearly a decade now that has led to this hypersexual backlash. And so leaning into a religious prudishness is the last thing your average gamer wants right now. And finally, DreadRoberts' final point of interest is his desire to not fall into the same extremist trap that got us here in the first place. What did he mean by this? Well, I think it's related to another similar passage from his first tweet, where he says that the butt cheeks and cleavage prevalent in anti-woke games, and reposted by gaming accounts, only serve to push normies in the same direction as the progressives, but on a parallel track. The use of these phrases, the parallel track, and the extremist trap that got us here in the first place, both point towards a belief that I think DreadRoberts probably holds, as it's pretty common among more religious right-leaning people. However, to describe it, I'm going to have to describe the relationship between the three broad factions in this conversation, if you haven't already intuited it. We've got the progressive, woke, LGBT activist people who bully everybody, the libertine, gooner, gamer types who want all standards slackened as much as possible so that there's tits and ass everywhere, and we've got the religious tradcons, who are hyper alert to degeneracy, who see sin around every corner. These three groups are all in opposition to each other, but when one of them is culturally ascendant, the other two usually unite to keep them in check, temporarily appealing to their overlapping values. The libertines are opposed by both the woke progressives and the religious tradcons over their desire for sexually explicit material that they both deem to be immoral. The religious tradcons are opposed by both the woke progressives and the libertines over their shared desire to be unshackled by traditional morality. And the religious tradcons and the libertines both oppose the woke progressives for pushing a new form of modernist morality into media. Now you might be asking, aren't the woke progressives and the libertines the same thing? And the answer to that is no. The word libertine is an old word. It specifically describes somebody who wants as little morality as possible in their life. It was used back in the day to describe people who ignored traditional morality and spent their time gambling and drinking and using drugs and having promiscuous sex. Libertine specifically means a lack of a moral code, and in the modern day, it refers to people who want to be unshackled by moral concerns as much as possible. The woke progressives do not lack a moral code. In fact, their moral code is very strict. It's just a very different moral code than the sort of thing that you find in Christianity. During the previous waves of satanic panics, like over rock and roll or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever else, the tradcons were the dominant cultural force, and both the progressives and the libertines of their era united against them in their common desire to be free of religious morality. When I grew up, the modern day libertines were the dominant cultural force, which is why the youth culture of the 90s and 2000s was so lackadaisical, while both the progressives and the tradcons chided us for our lack of moral standards. And for the 2010s, and so far the 2020s, it's the progressives that have been culturally dominant, and the tradcons and libertines have united against what they view as this new morality coming in. However, that progressive cultural dominance is reaching its end, which is part of the reason why the tradcons and the libertines are beginning to fight once again. So, when DreadRoberts refers to this parallel track, or he appeals to this idea of extremists leading gaming down this path again, he's referring to the tradcon position that progressives and libertines are two sides of the same coin, because despite their differences, they are both products of modern degeneracy. Of course, in reality, it's way more complicated than that. The gamers who want to see hot women in their games, and are willing to pay good money to see it happen, have no great love for the progressive moral code that has led to this desexed, uglified games industry, where sexuality is considered oppressive unless it's some abnormal sexuality, like Baldur's Gate 3's bear fucking, or goddesses of beauty being given man jaws or whatever. But to people like DreadRoberts, that distinction is washed away. Gamer hypersexuality and woke sterility must be smushed into the same camp, because from the religious point of view, they are both a form of disordered, immoral sexuality. This is why he positions himself as advocating for a happy medium between the two extremes of sexual degeneracy and sexual impotency. But to those people who are more interested in talking about artistic censorship and not sexual morality, DreadRoberts does not actually occupy this happy neutral midpoint. The happy medium is that liberal live and let live market morality, where people's choices determine what's popular, and the two extremes are the progressive censors on one end and the religious censors like DreadRoberts on the other. Now, to be fair, I don't think I've seen DreadRoberts specifically state that he wants the first Descendant or other similar sexual content in gaming to be censored, like the government should come in and put their thumb on the scales, or the corpo should put their thumb on the scales. No, he seems to simply find it immoral, and he wants a cultural rejection of it. And I mean, good luck, buddy, that's not going to happen. But at least he doesn't want adult content actually censored for adults. In video games, anyway. He's more than happy for the government to censor porn. My view on pornography is basically the same as my view on M-rated video games. Porn is obviously not for kids, and as a parent, you need to make sure your kids aren't getting up to some nonsense. But just because porn is inappropriate for kids to look at doesn't mean that adults should be banned from looking at it. Wanting a blanket ban on pornographic content because it's immoral is a significantly more popular position on the religious right, though. And you know what? I get it. That is in line with Christian values, even if I personally heavily disagree with them. I get why the Christians feel this way. My only question to people like DreadRoberts is, what is the spiritual difference between the first Descendant and actual porn? I mean, at first glance, the answer is obvious. One's explicit, the other one isn't. One shows actual real sex, the other shows a girl in a thong wiggling her butt. However, spiritually speaking, this is a difference in severity, not a difference in kind. As far as I understand it, Christian morality doesn't make a difference between explicit pornographic sex acts and lusting after attractive, scantily clad women. It is all sexual immorality that should be avoided, as God wants you to sanctify yourself, to control your body in a way that is holy and honorable. DreadRoberts might reply, well, there's clearly degrees here. And yes, there is. That's my position. But that cannot be the Christian position. God calls believers to not conform to the patterns of the world, but instead to renew your mind and follow his will. The phrase patterns of the world here refers to the idea that other worldly moral systems that don't align with God have different views on various sins, and so there's this gradient between what is acceptable to society and what is acceptable to God. This is true, but nonetheless the Bible says to explicitly reject that sliding scale and to not sin. So when DreadRoberts wants porn banned outright, but is not calling for censorship by the first Descendant, just this softer cultural rejection of it, that position does not align with Christian morals. It aligns with the patterns of the world, the earthly morality that says these things are different. But to God, they're not different. They're all sexually immoral. Maybe DreadRoberts is just compromising his morality here a bit and doesn't really care. Or maybe he doesn't actually view Christianity as the only source of morality in his life. That's possible. Maybe he's also uneducated about scripture. That's also possible. Or maybe he's lying. Maybe he's mask on about how much censorship he actually wants. Maybe if he and people like him actually win the battle to ban porn, and there's a non-0% chance that they might, they will move on from their soft cultural restrictions against sexual content in video games and progress to wanting it actually full-on banned as well. That is possible too. Though DreadRoberts never actually said this, other smaller accounts aligned with the Christian position, who have engaged in the Goonergate conversation, have been more open about it. Yes, they do actually just intend to censor sexual content in video games if they get their way. Unfortunately for them, the wider community does seem to largely be siding with the gamers and not the religious tradcons, because they're looking at this topic through the lens of censorship, not sexual immorality. From a censorship perspective, DreadRoberts is the other side of the woke coin. He is on a parallel track, to use his own terminology. For the progressive, there should be a line drawn between permissible and problematic content, and their progressive moral standard should be uniformly applied to the entire community, regardless of individual choice. In much the same way, for the Christian, there should be a line drawn between permissible and obscene content, with that standard also uniformly applied to the entire community regardless of choice. The primary difference between these two groups is what moral standard they're using to judge a thing as worthy of censorship. One judges by sin and obscenity, the other by bigotry and oppression. This comparison is what DreadRoberts was referring to when he said that Smash insulted him, but Smash wasn't the only one to point it out.
People trying to make me out to be a woke leftist is the funniest thing I've heard this year, and believe me, 2024 has had its highlights.
Well, no, you're not a woke leftist. You are, for lack of a better term, a woke rightist. I'll be honest with you, I don't like the phrase woke right. Not because what's being pointed at with the term doesn't exist, it certainly does. There absolutely is a phenomenon where right-wing ideologues use tactics that woke progressives use, and we do need some way to talk about it. But like I said at the start of the video, that topic is for another day. Anyway, if he responds to this video, he'll probably criticize me for not being a Christian, and yet telling a Christian how to live their life like a Christian does. And all I have to say to that is, yeah, so what? I'm actually pretty knowledgeable about Christianity despite being an atheist. And these are your ethics, not mine. This is the exact same sort of thing as pointing out progressive hypocrisy, where they appear to hold a moral position that they wield against their enemies, but they never actually judge themselves by it. something that I know that you know about, because you've pointed out their tendency to do this in your videos.
At least IGN is consistent and criticizes all sexuality in gaming right now, except they forgot Baldur's Gate 3. I guess they decided not to criticize that one as much.
Oh, so what is the problem with IGN selectively criticizing sexual content in gaming anyway? Is it that they claim to hold a moral code because doing so makes them look good? They don't actually enforce it consistently because selectively wielding it against their enemies as a weapon, but ignoring it when it applies to their own conduct is just a smart tactical choice? And we can rightfully point out how their actions basically just constitute virtue signaling, where it's one set of rules for thee and another for me? Well now, imagine that. Let's move on to the second major argument in Goonergate, one that I think attracted a bit more attention than the first, at least judging from my timeline, even though the actual content of the argument is more or less the same thing. Vee versus Melonie Mac. I'd like to start off this section by pointing out that although I've never heard of DreadRoberts before Goonergate, I actually have heard of many of the other larger names on the religious side of this conversation, Melonie Mac and JF Trent being two good examples. The former I'm friendly with, the latter, not so much. It turns out the difference is, the ones that I'm friendly with tend to actually be real gamers, even if we disagree politically, who have an actual history of involvement in the gaming industry in some capacity, while the ones that I'm not so friendly with tend to just be grifters. Trent specifically, I feuded with him over his fucking nonsense months ago because I saw right through his shit. But in the end, they are all doing it for the same reason. They're Christian traditionalists who have taken note of something that they consider to be sinful, and they don't want it published. They sometimes even say directly, yeah, I've sided with you in the past, against the woke mob and the trans ideology, but I'm not pro-porn or pro-fanservice. Which brings us to Melonie Mac specifically. I'm gonna be honest, I actually really like her old work. One quick look through her backlog shows that she's actually a gamer and not just some tourist. Her first video ever uploaded was back in September of 2009, and it is straight out of that era.
My name is Melonie, as I said before. I'm 22 years old, and I have a lot of hobbies and a lot of things that interest me. And I'm going to start off with saying I love video games. That's my favorite. And I do have all of the current generation consoles.
She looks and sounds exactly like the alt-punk gamer girls that were in university back in the day. She ended up moving into games journalism and attended a bunch of mainstream events throughout the 2010s as both guest and host. She actually had some pretty high-profile gigs, working for GameStop, Google Play, and YouTube Gaming alongside, hey, it's Jeff Keighley again. Of course, she cultivated her own brand on the side as well, doing YouTube videos and Twitch streams. As far as I can tell, she never explicitly shied away from politics or drama content, but it wasn't her focus back in the day. And additionally, her views on a lot of this stuff have changed pretty radically over the course of the 2020s. We were mutuals in the old days a few Twitter accounts back. You know, I've been banned from Twitter a dozen times now. And going back to some of her older posts, it's clear that she was at one time not an extremist. But you know what? Years go by, people change, people get banned off Twitter. And when I finally reconnected with her back at the start of the year, she was fully in her born-again Christian arc. We were only passing acquaintances before, but from what I've seen, she seems to have radically changed a lot of her positions, which I guess is pretty normal after converting to a new religion. It's just kind of sad to see from my point of view. The actual content of Melonie's arguments are very similar to DreadRoberts's, and we already spent a bunch of time analyzing them, so we don't have to go too deep on the repeats. Let's speedrun them real quick and save some time for the new stuff. Melonie says,
slutty games don't sell for me and lots of people. Most gamers don't want coomer games. That's just a weird subset.
As we went over before, that's not precisely true. While the people who demand every single girl be outrageously attractive and sexual all the time are kinda weird, yeah, I think most normal gamers just don't care too much about this topic. If there's a cute jiggling girl on the screen, cool. If not, cool. I don't think there's too many people who are actually explicitly driven away by sexy characters. Also, this post is specifically in reference to Marvel Rivals. And Melonie, if for some reason you think people aren't attracted to these chicks, you just haven't been paying attention. For some of them, their butt size quite literally levels up when you put on one of the paid skins.
Marvel Rivals is a perfect example that you don't win the culture war by fighting perversion with another perversion.
Psst. Hey, Melonie. They've leaked Squirrel Girl's model to the Blender artist. It's over.
A woman dancing in a thong is soft porn. Yes. I am pervert repellent. They are always mad at me on either side of the aisle. I just don't care. Go cry about it. I'm not on your side.
This whole either side of the aisle bit is the same thing as DreadRoberts positioning himself as the moral center between two anti-Christian extremes. We've already analyzed that. And Melonie's appealed to this idea across multiple posts. Same sin with a different paint job is pretty much identical to going the same way on a parallel track. And putting gooners in the same camp as the pride flag people is just another way of saying that she's against both the progressives and the libertines. However, I will say, as somebody who has also had to constantly point out that I'm not on your side, I have some sympathy here. I get it. Tons of people think that I'm pro-Trump just because I'm anti-woke or anti-DEI or whatever. And that just ain't the fucking case either.
It's about damn time! I've been waiting, Ashirama! I'll deal with you later.
Christians don't need gooners' porn brains. We've got Christ and we will not be compromising on our biblical values. The war is already won. Christ wins. You can get with the program or die in your sin.
This is again something else you've already covered. You are compromising on your biblical values by aligning yourself with the patterns of the world instead of the patterns of God. To be lukewarm on lesser forms of sexual immorality simply because they're lesser isn't godly. It's still sinning in your heart. If you think perversion is still perversion, then you have no choice but to want it censored.
It's like boiling a frog. And this is, you know, and for those who don't know the term, it's not going to know you're boiling it when you first put it in the water. The water slowly gets warm, and before you know it, that frog is boiled and dead. That goes with all sin. People think that they can dabble into something innocently. Oh, just in moderation. I'm just going to do this. And before they know it, they are so deep in the trenches of it, and they're so far gone.
And since we're on the topic of censorship, when asked about her normally anti-censorship oriented stances, Melonie said,
I'm on the side of Jesus Christ and not supporting perversion. You can have attractive characters without being pornographic. I'm 100% anti-porn.
listen, the only truly bad porn is badly acted porn.
I see you don't have a lifeguard here at your beach. I'm not at the beach, this is a bathtub.
Okay, understood. You're anti-porn. But you know the stuff that we're talking about isn't porn, right? Of course you do. After all, your content on Stellar Blade, back when that game was in the news cycle, is cut from the same cloth as DreadRoberts'.
We're going to beat up the alien, but if we can do it while pleasuring the eyes of the men, that's a bonus.
Hey, why are you just laughing that off, Melonie? Surely pleasuring the eyes of men is sinful on some level, right? Now, to her credit, Melonie didn't just fully turn a blind eye to this incongruency back in those videos, the way that DreadRoberts did.
I think there still are some degenerate people that exist. Let's be real. We've seen them post their Rule 34 crap and all that, and a bunch of the like furry types people, a bunch of people even with like Overwatch fan art that draw really gross stuff. And so yeah, are there some degenerates who exist and want to turn everything pornographic? Yes.
Well, okay, she stuck to her morals. She brought up the Rule 34 side of the conversation, which does make her more consistent in her beliefs. When she says stuff like, I was always like this, it actually holds more weight. So you know what? Good for her. Here is my problem. It's not about hypocrisy, since unlike DreadRoberts, she's been consistently quite open in her content about opposing what she calls Coomer degeneracy in pornography for years now. It's not even about our moral differences either. I might not be a Christian, but I expect her to follow her morality, even if I disagree with it. My actual problem is the concept creep, the sneaky widening of the term porn to include things that aren't actually porn. That first Descendant clip, it's not porn. From a Christian perspective, it's degenerate, it's sexually immoral, it's certainly sinful, but it's not porn. And yet, in that previous comment where Melonie's talking to Oko about it, she calls it porn. In this conversation, it would actually be more accurate, both factually and morally, for Melonie to say, you can have attractive characters without being degenerate. But she doesn't say that, she says pornographic instead. Why? Well, I don't know, I'm not in her head. Maybe she just slipped up. That's possible. It's also possible that she understands words loaded with Christian moral subtext tend to not convince non-Christians, like sinful or degenerate or sodomy. Remember, sodomy didn't originally mean gay anal. It started off referring to all sorts of sexual hedonism. This is the origin of that one viral clip where the MAGA idiot claims that using protection while having sex with your girlfriend is gay sex because he's stupid and he thinks that sodomy means gay when it actually just means hedonistic.
No birth control, nothing, because I'm not going to have gay sex. And like gay sex is more than just like another man and a man. It's just like the idea of looking at sex as such a materialistic thing and just like, oh, well, like we just have an orgasm and that's fun or whatever. No, like, dude, sex is about having children. It's about having babies. Like you pump yourself full of birth control and then you have sex with your wife and like there's no purpose there except just pleasure. That's the only purpose.
Should people
pleasure.
who are born like infertile have sex?
I think that it's crazy infertile people don't think I don't see anybody really saying that, hey, I'm infertile, so I'm going to be celibate for the rest of my life. I'm not going to touch sex. I'm not going to have sex.
You think it's crazy people don't say that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Hey fellas, is it gay to fuck a woman? Truly a question of our times. So instead of using those more accurate Christian words, she uses a secular word instead, pornographic, possibly as a tactic to convince the non-Christians she's talking to that there's something wrong happening here. Maybe she did it purposefully, maybe it was accidental, I don't know. But if she did do it purposefully, then this is a subversive tactic, and it would explain why Melonie uses the terms slutty, soft porn, softcore porn, and just porn interchangeably. When your average person hears the word porn, they think people having sex on camera.
I'm so glad that our lemon tree finally grew.
Me too.
And sprouted fruitful lemony lemons.
Not a girl in a thong wiggling her butt in a video game. And when the religious tradcons come along and say, let's ban porn, your average person hears, let's make it illegal to produce, buy, sell, or view people having sex on camera. When what they're actually saying is, let's make it illegal to produce, buy, sell, or play girls in a thong wiggling their butts in a video game. I mean, they also want to ban actual porn too, obviously. They're not going to ban Cheesecake while keeping Pornhub up. That would be retarded. But this stretching of the word porn to cover non-pornographic content is one way that a subversive element would try to ban non-pornographic but still sexual content if they wanted to do so. And poking around further, you can see a bit more evidence of this sleight of hand. Swimsuits exist in this sort of gray area for Melonie Mac. She explicitly says that bikinis are not pornographic. Okay, fair enough. But that first Descendant clip that she calls pornographic, well, that shows a lot less skin than a bikini. And yet she was okay with Stellar Blade, which put Eve in a whole bunch of outfits that were just as explicit as the first Descendant, if not more so, while at the same time being supportive of Grum's game, which has girls who are about as naked as Eve in them. From what I can tell about Melonie's moral code here, something like Baywatch, that swimsuit-focused beach show from the early 90s, is Schrodinger's Coomer, existing simultaneously in both a sinful and non-sinful state. Okay, I'm joking around a bit. And again, to her credit, Melonie goes out of her way multiple times to point out she doesn't want all of this sexual Coomer content censored, she just objects to it morally. She even makes fun of people who believe that her moral objections mean that she's pro-censorship. Alright, I got it. I mean, if Anita Sarkeesian came out and said the same thing, or Alyssa Mercante, to use a more modern Gamergate 2 example, all of these people would jump down their throats screaming about censorship. But fine, you're not pro-censorship. I got it. Except, Melonie, when you are pro-censorship.
We're all being lied to about the real developers of the Tomb Raider and Soul Reaver remasters. It's Saber Interactive, not Crystal Dynamics. But for some reason, they don't want you to know this.
This is specifically about the Tomb Raider Original Trilogy remaster controversy. In response to her tweet, somebody mentioned that the jacket for Tomb Raider was actually censored. The brown jacket that Pierre Dupont wears in the original PlayStation game featured a fully nude woman with her tits proudly on display, which as a kid you could only really barely make out, considering the low quality of the texture and the blurriness of your average CRT. In the remaster, the woman was put in a red bikini instead. And you know what? I kinda get it. The 90s were a different time. You could actually just get away with shit like that if it were hidden enough or blurry enough. And Tomb Raider is not the only game to slip this sort of thing in. Here's Melonie's reply.
Don't care who gets mad, the jacket needed censoring. A fully nude woman on the back of a jacket in a modern game is too gratuitous. It was passable on the PlayStation because you could barely see what it was.
Okay, she's basically offering the same explanation that I did, but I didn't say that it needed to be censored. I just said that I understood why it was. A faithful re-release of a game should not censor content from modern sensibilities. At best, it should simply say, hey, you know what? It was acceptable to do this back in the day, it's not now, but for artistic integrity reasons, we're presenting it as it was. Like how old movies or shows have those splash cards on Netflix or Disney+. And you know what? Personally, I even find that cringe, but at least that makes sense and is not really objectionable. You still get the content as it was. The problem here is that Melonie Mac is trying to have it both ways. She talks about being anti-censorship, which I think is good. That's a good moral principle. But it's not a Christian moral principle. Christian morality does actually include censoring what they view to be evil, which includes sexual degeneracy. In order to truly follow Christian morals, you can't not censor this stuff, which is why when push comes to shove, Melonie's publicly stated anti-censorship position falls away, and she reverts to saying, okay, yeah, I do actually want this stuff censored, even though I'm going to keep saying I'm anti-censorship. Hell, you know what? I know that I've also come around to the upsides of some limited forms of censorship when necessary, but at least I'm not going to keep blowing smoke up your ass about standing on principle on some fundamental anti-censorship position. I haven't called myself a free speech extremist or anything like that for years now, because through trial and error, I began to understand some of the serious problems with that position. But at least I don't keep going around calling myself something that I'm not. It is the duplicity that's the problem here. Melonie Mac is saying that she's anti-censorship despite holding some pro-censorship positions that only truly reveal themselves when pressed. And she's stretching the word porn to cover things that are not actually porn, in service of that censorship. Now, if there's one video game series that Melonie Mac is a hardcore fan of, it's Tomb Raider, which, you know what, is a pretty good choice. I already brought up Lara Croft a bit earlier in the video, with regards to her status as a gaming sex symbol, and this topic is something that Melonie has a blind spot for. Underneath one of her several posts, where she claims that gamer coomers aren't real gamers. Gamers are just like the Rainbow Alphabet League because they're both degens, you know the drill. Somebody posted at her, "This is literally your favorite video game. Official collaboration with Playboy in 1999, with a naked render of Lara Croft." Melonie replied to this by saying,
"You're a liar. Tomb Raider never collaborated with Playboy. They always turned them down, and the more sexual marketing images went against the developers' principles. They were vocally upset about it. You'll find none of this in the classic games. You'd know that if you actually played games."
Now, I mean, there was that naked woman on the back of the jacket that you admitted needed censoring, so "you'll find none of this in the classic games" isn't a true statement, unless you meant none of this to refer to Lara nudity and not just nudity in general. However, several people pointed out that the August 1999 issue of Playboy did, in fact, feature a nude Lara Croft cosplayer, with the Tomb Raider logo plastered across the front. And it's not hard to find other naked Lara Croft renders on the internet that look pretty official, with people claiming that they're from the Playboy in question. At first glance, that appears to be that. Melonie's just wrong. Except, hold on, the Playboy issue specifically credits a real woman, Nell McAndrew, and these images apparently from the issue in question are renders, not photos. What gives? Well, I did actually spend a good block of time digging up the answer to this one. It was actually kind of obscure. I almost pulled the trigger and bought a copy of the Playboy in question on eBay, just to confirm things for myself, and for no other reason, you weirdos. But it turns out I didn't have to. The woman in the Playboy, Nell McAndrew, was actually hired by Eidos to play the role of Lara Croft in various TV commercials, non-lewd photo shoots, and real-life appearances. She didn't pose nude during any of this stuff. These were primarily action shots, where the most that you saw of her was like her upper thigh. McAndrew held this job for around a year, until she decided to do the Playboy shoot, and Playboy marketed her photo set as being of the gamer-famous Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. Eidos didn't approve of Playboy using their IP in reference to McAndrew's shoot for them, even if the only reason anybody knew who she was because of her role as Lara Croft. And they threatened Playboy with a lawsuit over the whole affair. This is why, if you dig into Playboy's official online archives, all references to Tomb Raider have been airbrushed off of the scans of the August 1999 issue. In that issue, McAndrew did pose naked, and there was some official Lara Croft artwork from the game alongside her, used by Playboy without permission. But as far as I can tell, those nude renders, they weren't actually from the Playboy. So when Melonie Mac said Tomb Raider never collaborated with Playboy, and the developers were vocally upset, she's correct, that's true. However, the part where she claimed the more sexual marketing images went against the developer's principles, that is still false. I don't think she's lying here, I think she's just wrong and doesn't know it. Those nude renders of Lara Croft are official renders. They just weren't published in Playboy. Now you might be asking, okay, where did they come from? And the answer to that is a different book. This is Lara Croft, The Art of Virtual Seduction. This book was published by Prima, you know, the guys who make game guides, and it's officially sanctioned by Eidos. It contains tons of behind-the-scenes content, like interviews with people who worked on the game, photos from within the studio, concept art, official renders, and yes, a lot of the focus of the book is on the sexuality of Lara Croft. In fact, those more sexual renders were made specifically by Eidos for this book. It's important to point out that the content of the book is evidence that the people who worked on the Tomb Raider games do not share Melonie Mac's outlook and morality when it comes to sexuality in gaming. For example, in the book you can find complaints that Sony and Nintendo are less liberal with sexual content than what can be published on PC. There's also an essay which explicitly places Lara Croft in the same category as other powerful, competent, but also overtly sexual female characters, most notably Barbed Wire. There's a second essay, this one specifically about looking up pictures of attractive women on the early internet, where Lara is called a sex symbol and placed in the same league as several other 90s era bombshells. In fact, the author specifically goes out of their way to point out that the early popularity of Lara Croft online is not due to a general love of the Tomb Raider games, but instead is due to gamers, who are probably overwhelmingly men, let's be real, looking up Lara Croft herself for her sexual attributes. I'm going to read off the final paragraph of this one, because it really hammers the point home. Insatiable fans have used computer drawing programs to rid Lara of her last shreds of covering. Thus, the nude raider was born. Most fans wrinkle their noses at such pixel manipulating shenanigans. Some of the nude raider pages misuse the disrobed Lara to bring people to commercial hardcore pornography sites. More and more carriers of serious sites devoted to Lara are distancing themselves from such enterprises, decorating their web pages with a nude raider-free logo and showing Lara in her true splendor, lightly clothed and sexy. Real fans agree, Lara's eroticism lies in what is still hidden. What this shows us is that even back in 2000, there was a discussion over what constitutes real fans of Tomb Raider. And Eidos makes it clear here, it's not the actual pornography. Fair enough. But it's also not Melonie Mac's vision of Lara Croft either. There's no ambiguity here. Lara was designed explicitly as a sexual object, a lightly clothed sexual object, leaving some things to the imagination, rather than an explicitly naked pornographic one, but a sexual object nonetheless. The reader is invited to get to know her from all angles in the book's various photo spreads, which are the source of those renders that people commonly, but incorrectly, believe to be from Playboy. And at the beginning of the most lewd set of the bunch is an in-universe model biography for Lara Croft. That, you know what, could actually be pulled out of the pages of Playboy. So fair enough. Other parts of the book point towards an almost feminist view of Lara Croft, that her explicitly sexual nature is based in the character's self-confidence and power. This is the same argument that you hear from porn stars who claim to be feminists, who say that they're consenting to what they do, and their ability to choose it is empowering, even if the actual things they do on camera are degrading. And Melonie understands that from a Christian point of view, this logic is bullshit. It doesn't matter if the woman consents, she's still doing something sinful.
And then there's girls that would look you straight in the eye and be like, I don't feel demeaned by this. I feel empowered. And it's like, well, you can't tell them they're wrong. I guess you'd have to just
wait
for something to happen.
Maybe they do feel that way, but that doesn't mean that it's right. You know, when somebody like a serial killer is murdering people, they feel great, they feel empowered. Doesn't make it okay, and that's why we can't just trust our feelings on things.
It doesn't matter whether you believe in that logic or you think it's cope. For this conversation, what it means is that Tomb Raider, in both intention and execution, is not a property that Melonie Mac can consider to be moral by Christian standards. The only difference between Lara Croft and that butt-wiggling video from the first Descendant is the latter's increased graphical capabilities, making its lewdness more realistic and more appealing by today's standards. The underlying foundation is the same. Melonie is wrong about her idol. If she's gonna stretch the word porn to include lewdness in video games, then she should also probably set that cool statue in the background on fire too. By the way, if you're watching Melonie, don't actually do that. This thing looks to be one of those life-size statues created by referencing Angelina Jolie's measurements during the filming of the first Tomb Raider movie. And there's not that many of them left. It's actually pretty cool.
You guys ain't cool. You're nerds.
Anyway, this brings us to the end of the Melonie Mac segment of this video. I know that I mentioned at the start that it was Melonie Mac versus Vee, but to be honest, Vee made all the same arguments that I would make. We pretty much just agree on this topic. However, Vee also began to feel like he was being pushed to go after Melonie. Like there were some bad actors in the background who wanted to see this go beyond the actual topic itself, who wanted Melonie personally destroyed.
I feel that some individuals were trying to manipulate me. I was getting DMs, I was getting messages from people to start shit-talking on Melonie Mac, to dig up her past, to talk about things that are in the public and some aren't. I was also getting certain lewd images of her that I've noticed that they're AI made, and people were asking me to make them public. I don't want to do that. Like, this is not about that. This is not even about Melonie Mac. This is just a simple cultural shift so that people know where they stand. If you're a Christian that genuinely wants to censor video games, then know that many of the people that you've allied with in your fight against the woke aren't going to be your friends. Like, they do not believe the same way you do, and you probably know that, which is why you're trying to be subversive about it.
Yeah, I have roughly the same experience as Vee here, with people sliding into my DMs too. I've seen those photoshopped or AI-generated fake nudes of Melonie too. Some of them are pretty obviously fake, some of them less so. But either way, it's pretty disgusting. Morally disgusting, I mean. I obviously find Melonie attractive. Okay, what I mean is it's a shitty thing to do, to create fake nudes of a real person and then spread them around in order to discredit them, when it's got nothing to do with the actual fucking argument. Back during the original Gamergate, we all made it very clear. It might have been funny that Zoe Quinn fucked 5 guys, but nobody actually cared she fucked 5 guys. It was about the ethical conversation. I am 99% sure that the Melonie nudes and wild stories and secrets are all just entirely made up, but more importantly, they don't matter when it comes to the argument. And the people who are doing it are, frankly, helping ruin the legitimate critique of Melonie's ideas here. Thankfully, she doesn't seem too plussed about it.
Has anybody in your family asked you about your fake lewds or your fake nudes that have been circulating?
Thankfully, no. I'm so glad, because that would just be such a bummer if they thought something like that was real. But fortunately, my family, parents and brothers, they don't live on the internet. I did tell my mom about it though later, because like when it was happening, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so stupid. And I was like, oh, by the way, Mom, I just had to handle something because people were posting fake lewds of me. Mom's like, oh, they would do that? Poor
like,
Mom.
I think Melonie Mac's appeal to an anti-censorship position was not her actual morality, because when push comes to shove, when the choice is to allow degeneracy to continue uncensored, or to call for degeneracy to be censored in line with her religious values, she does choose censorship. It's important to point out that your average gamer is not anti-progressive because of some inherent hatred of the left and loyalty to the right. Your average gamer is anti-progressive because it's the progs who have been shitting up their hobby. If progressives existed in gaming spaces and didn't shit them up, I don't think most gamers would care all that much. But like DreadRoberts, Melonie Mac unfortunately doesn't seem to share that live and let live morality. She used to at one point, but those days seem to be long gone. The next Goonergate argument I want to look at is between Madam Savvy and JF Trent. And it's here we can finally start getting at the core of the issue, the fundamental disconnect between the gamers and the Christians. When SmashJT was pointing out the hypocrisy of some of DreadRoberts' positions, Savvy chimed in with,
"He's going out of his way to ignore the criticism of his language choice, and it's really obnoxious. He can dislike something, but using morality language and trying to speak for more than himself based on arbitrary moral appointment to try to shield himself from disagreement is where people are upset. Otherwise, perhaps I'll use his language against him and call him indecent for liking games depicting murder."
In response, Trent simply dropped a one-line post to her.
"Relativism is fake and gay,"
and attached a page on moral relativism, which put forward some rudimentary arguments on the topic. The claim here is that if we accept that morality is relative and not universal, then there is no mechanism by which we can judge others, since others can simply say whatever they do is moral from their point of view. The example given here is of a rapist who thinks it's moral to rape others. If we accept that everyone is a sovereign moral agent, abiding by their own morality, we cannot judge him for his actions being immoral, because within his moral code they are. And I get it, there is some teeth to this argument. After all, weirdo, multi-culty, pacifist progressive types deploy this all the time when talking about foreigners who commit crime, so fair enough.
I have been personally affected by sexual harassment and assault.
Two instances. One I absolutely don't want to talk about, but the other one actually, like, I ended up pressing charges, and he got thrown out of court because
do you think it maybe speaks a little bit to the fact that we have a rape culture when we put 6 people in a room together to talk about Me Too, and the 4, when they're like, hey, who of you have experienced sexual assault? And the 4 women sit down and they've all been raped and they all can barely choke out a coherent sentence. Do we think this perhaps maybe slightly speaks to the fact that there's a problem? Like, Me Too has gone too far. False allegations are ruining people's lives. Okay, who among you have experienced sexual assault? And like every woman in the room starts crying? Like, almost every female friend I have has been the recipient of sexual assault or violence or rape or whatever at some point in their lives.
but yeah, like, because the perpetrator wasn't white, and because he was like, I'm, you know, part of like a certain religion.
Are we being real?
And the police were basically just like, we can't because of cultural differences, which I don't feel like is such a good.
What? Bullshit! Are you fucking kidding me? Did she turn her fucking rape confession onto how the rape fugees fucking Ahmed Muhammad raped her and the police were like, oh, we can't persecute brown people? Bullshit! Bullshit! Is there anything on this? What's this bitch's name? I take it all back, fellas. Don't believe all women, because I don't believe anything about this bitch's story. Choking out like, see, the problem was, my rapist, Muhammad, well, he wasn't white and...
Where were we? Oh yeah, moral relativism. Trent is still wrong here. He's appealing to the negative outcomes of moral relativism being correct, but that has little bearing on whether or not moral relativism is actually correct. After all, a true thing is still true, even if it has a bad outcome. The actual answer to the moral relativity question is a lot more complicated, and we'll dig into it a little later in the video. Now to be clear, I like Savvy, I like her content, but the reply she gave here doesn't actually really work. Let me show you how.
Your example is based on a real-world crime, or if you want to remove social constraints and archaic tribalistic behavior that no longer needs to be practiced to continue the species. The reason why this example is silly is because it continues to conflate reality and fiction. If I write a story about rape, there is no victim. It's fiction. However, in the real world, rape is bad and there is no moral relativism to be had there.
What Savvy's doing here is something that I used to do a lot, especially back during the first Gamergate, and it took me a long time to really wrap my head around why it doesn't work. Savvy is under the assumption that Trent is operating in good faith, that they both share that very normal, kinda liberal, kinda libertarian moral code of live and let live. This is why she says the example is silly, because it continues to conflate reality and fiction. Her argument is that rape is obviously bad in real life. No one disagrees. But stories about rape are just stories. No one's actually getting harmed. And so with regards to them, you should have no moral judgment. However, Trent isn't operating in good faith. He's actually one of those snakes, like Milo and Cernovich the last time around, who slithered into the gaming space under the cover of anti-progressive solidarity. He doesn't actually believe in that live and let live morality. For him, the idea of leaving people alone to create the stories they want to create isn't actually a moral principle. And insofar as he might have said so before, I think he just lied.
You sit on a throne of lies.
His actual moral principle is that people should create stories with Christian ethics embedded within them, just like how progressives think that people should create stories with woke ethics embedded within them. When Savvy appeals to the live and let live moral principle, it rolls off of Trent like water off a duck's back, because it's not actually something he holds as a moral principle. To Trent and others like him, it is a tool to temporarily be wielded in order to get people like Savvy on side. Savvy further says,
rape is bad because we as a species have accepted the social contract of order. We as a species adhere to certain appeals to morality in order to maintain order and coexistence. It has been determined to be beneficial to us as a species to view the removal of another's choice to be wrong, punishable even. However, by conflating the very rights and wrongs of reality with the unreal world of fiction, you just want to express control based on your own personal morality.
This is completely true. Trent does want that control, but Savvy's other reasoning falls into the trap that Trent laid for her. When she says that passive statement, it has been determined to be beneficial. Well, who determined it? If it's God, then you're in Trent's realm, arguing over what the objective morality actually is that must be applied to all people. If humans determined it, then Trent is correct. This is ultimately relativistic morality, and you haven't answered his objection. When Savvy says he's conflating the very right and wrongs of reality with the unreal world of fiction, she's falling back to the assumption that they share the live and let live moral code when it comes to what art should say, when in reality they just don't share that moral code. At the very end of the tweet, Savvy asks a question.
A woman's ass is not pornographic in nature and should not be problematic if someone wants to create fictional ass. Why is his view of fiction better than mine?
That final line, why is his view of fiction better than mine? That is Savvy appealing to the live and let live moral code. But a Christian's answer, Trent's ultimate answer, is simple. His view is better than yours because his is more in alignment with God than yours is.
But isn't that a sin?
Just about everything is a sin.
Trent offers up this reply.
You lived through COVID and saw how fictional propaganda affected people's behavior. You also live in an era where people would create fictional commercials to get people to purchase products, choose how they spend their time, and even take drugs or pick what foods they eat. You can't be serious with this nonsense.
What Trent is pointing out here is the media that people consume has an impact on their beliefs about the world. And this seems obvious to me, though I think Trent might overstate its effects. For example, companies advertise products because they know that advertising the product will make it more likely that you buy it. Now, it is pretty rare that advertising gets you to buy something that you just have zero interest in, but advertising helps get the word out about products that you would be interested in if only you knew about them. And it may also push you into a purchase if you were on the edge. Companies wouldn't waste their money on advertising if people consuming advertising had no impact on their spending habits. Like Trent points out, it's not just food or drugs or other products. It's also real-world events. I am very certain that he and I fall on the opposite side of the COVID argument, but he's correct in that your view of the world outside of your daily life is largely shaped by the news sources you consume. If you spend all day reading about how COVID is a death virus wiping out everyone, and you'd better triple mask up and get your 18th booster, that is what you'll probably feel that reality is. And if you consume sources that claim that the vaccine is poison and COVID is a hoax or whatever else, that is also probably what you'll feel like reality is. Think back to my video on Bayesian inference. Belief feels like reality to the true believer. It's this understanding of media consumption habits that leads to the progressive slogan, everything is political. And Trent is here saying, yes, everything is political. Therefore, everything should be turned in service of Christian politics, not progressive ones. He'd probably say everything is a question of morals rather than politics. But he's making the same point. The progressive and the Christian both view the liberals' live and let live morality, which desires a neutral space where competing moral systems need not fight, by having a private domain where they can live their truth, and a public domain where they can agree to come together and coexist under the same set of rules. They view that system as not actually possible. To them, neutral spaces aren't real. They're simply power vacuums that a new ideology will inevitably take over. And it should be theirs. That's what progressives mean when they say everything is political. And that is what Trent is saying here. He's observing Savvy's neutral space, and he views it as a place for him to plant his Christian flag, since his moral code demands that he do it. And if he doesn't do it, somebody else will anyway. Savvy's reply to this shows that she doesn't really get the point.
People need to take responsibility and agency. Fiction is fiction, but please go on about policing it. So that guy wants to police ass because he thinks it's pornographic? Do I get to police murder? No more GTA. Do I get to police theft? Shut down all Assassin's Creed. Do I get to police male power fantasies? No more superheroes. Oh, it's only one side who gets to police fiction? Spare me.
I agree with her here. All of this policing is stupid. But notice when she says fiction is fiction, she's still leaning into that splitting of spaces, where there is a private domain where people can do what they like, which includes consuming content that others might find morally objectionable. But Trent doesn't view the existence of that private space as a moral good. He views that space as one which must be turned Christian.
I'm respecting your privacy by knocking, but asserting my authority as your father by coming in anyway!
Trent reinforces this position by pointing out that Savvy is not neutral herself either. She's also following a moral code that requires the setting of some sort of standard.
Why'd you police Halo? Could be you want to police gender ideology out of video games? Imagine that.
Savvy asks,
explain to me how pointing out someone with 0 credentials is policing Halo. I didn't say Halo didn't need to be made, did I?
And Trent replies with,
I assume you didn't want a gender studies major working on Halo because they would inject gender studies ideology in the game. Was that assumption wrong?
Savvy then says,
apparently, we shouldn't be making commentary now on who might be a good fit for an established IP and lore? A franchise that is currently struggling to reclaim its spot as top tier? I have been very clear from the very beginning on my stance. Everyone is free to make what they want, but if someone seeks to change what people want to create, then they are the problem. I always invite people who call something problematic to create their own thing. I wouldn't bar her from creating a story she wanted to make from the heart, regardless of what it was. The market will dictate success. You've truly lost the plot, though, if you're trying to equate me commenting on a company's hiring practice to policing what should be made in fiction.
This is again my position as well. Make the Dustborns and the Concords and whatever else you want to make. If it's good, it'll sell. If it's not, it won't. But here is Trent's reply.
You just admit it, you're totally fine policing, but you just don't like the so-called policing that Dread and I advocate for.
Savvy asks,
where did I police anything?
And Trent clarifies.
When you said, if someone seeks to change what exists, disrespect lore, and call it problematic but want to profit off IP, tell people what to create, then they are the problem. That is policing. Obviously, I typically agree with the sentiment, but I also recognize that I am policing the devs who want to do this.
Which is kind of funny because in the previous post he labeled his policing as so-called policing, implying that he didn't actually believe he was policing anyone. But here he is admitting that he does it, so fuck it. It's at this point that Trent stops replying, and he does this sort of thing a lot.
Wait a minute.
And no, it's not like what I sometimes do, where I stop scrolling on Twitter mid-conversation and go do something else, because I actually have a life and other things to do. Trent smugly and specifically says, good night, after extracting a relatively minor concession from Savvy, because he's actually an intellectual coward. But it's actually pretty easy to argue against his position going forward from this point. Savvy starts off her next post by saying,
that isn't policing, it's respecting what someone created.
But unfortunately for her, I have to point out, that is a form of policing, and that's okay. You two have now drilled down to your differing moral standards on this topic. For Trent, he believes it's appropriate to step in and stop an artist from creating something if it's morally degenerate by Christian standards. For Savvy, she believes it's appropriate to step in and stop an artist from creating something if that artist has inherited a property with an already established canon, like Halo, and is purposely violating that canon in order to turn the property into something that it's not. Both of you do believe in policing, you just have very different views on when policing is appropriate. If I were Savvy in this conversation, I would have just bit that bullet, because the conversation can actually continue from here in a way that Trent wouldn't like, if he actually stuck around long enough to get destroyed, which I doubt he would.
Coward.
The rest of Savvy's post here we'll cover a little bit later in the video, but I want to finish up with Trent's arguments first. Backing up through the thread a bit, another guy says to Trent, fiction is inherently harmless. You suspend your disbelief, you know it's not real. And that's true, but only to a point. Of course, fiction imparts cultural values. That is, the moral of the story. But it doesn't have to. In fact, everything is political is probably more properly worded as everything has a political interpretation. But shutting your brain off and just enjoying a story is also valid. Here's Trent's reply.
The people making fiction don't believe this. In fact, they tell you the opposite. They know it affects people.
With an attached headline of The Mandalorian expressing its values to the next generation. Yes, this is true, there are morals in The Mandalorian, and in many other TV shows and movies and games and whatever else. And those morals are being consumed along with the product. But Savvy hops in again, saying,
if you're low IQ enough and can't separate reality and fiction, I suppose so. But I don't look at humans so shallowly usually. Me writing a story about a woman being slapped does nothing to change reality itself. Women get slapped in real life, whether I write this story or not. To imply more people would slap women because of my story is to imply humans have a far deeper problem because it wasn't the fiction existing that prompted it. I didn't invent such a concept. The person has to be capable of it in the first place to arbitrarily want to slap a woman. But I'd say most people aren't like that. In fact, 99% of people can't be like that. Otherwise, given the box office popularity of films depicting violence, that would mean more people commit violence, which isn't the case.
And of course, Trent does his usual thing where he just says wrong and then drops a block quote somebody else wrote. It's like the dude can't actually argue his points himself. The passage in question this time talks about declining birth rates coinciding with telenovela popularity in Brazil in the 70s and 80s. Savvy correctly points out that it was probably other social changes that caused the decline, which I think is probably true, but you didn't even need to go that far. Trent's replying to Savvy's example of fictional violence not causing real-world violence with an example about reproduction instead, which is not the same thing. Humans cannot be pushed into doing everything through simple media exposure. Here's an obvious example. If I'm a straight white guy with normal sexual interests, and I'm bombarded with images of extremely hot black chicks 24/7, I might become somebody who's preferential to hot black chicks through repeated exposure, because that's already within the normal range of what I could be interested in. However, if you bombard me with violent movies 24/7, I'm not going to turn into a murderer, because murdering another person and sexual attraction to a specific type of woman are two very different things. Here's the problem with Savvy's position. She's insisting that the media people consume doesn't affect their outlook on the world, or at least if it does, those people are low IQ. Meanwhile, Trent is insisting that the media people consume does affect their outlook on the world, and therefore media should promote his morality, while the media that promotes his political opponent's morality should be censored. Trent's position is more distasteful, but it's also more accurate factually. We are affected by the media we consume, at least partially. The degree in which we're affected will likely change person to person and media to media. Savvy's probably correct when she says that IQ plays a role, but I think this is actually a very complicated thing to try and calculate out. However, if this makes it seem like I side with Trent against Savvy, absolutely not. Just because Trent is correct about the mechanisms at play here doesn't mean that his conclusions are moral ones. Quite the contrary, in fact. 1, most people's morals are pretty set in stone by the time they reach adulthood, and media consumption will generally do very little to move those morals around. For example, watching a movie where a wife is beat up by a husband won't turn husbands into wife beaters en masse, as long as they have a solid moral foundation from which to engage the topic beforehand. And 2, even if hypothetically somebody's morals might be affected in a way that you don't like by a specific piece of media, if you do actually value personal liberty, freedom of association, or consent as moral virtues, then you have to take up a modified form of Savvy's position. It's not that media consumption doesn't affect a person's outlook, and therefore we can just disregard the messaging or politics of everything because of suspension of disbelief. Rather, it's that it's more moral to allow people the freedom to choose to consume media that you might think is immoral, that you believe may potentially turn them down an immoral path, than it is to force them to make the choice you want them to make. Morality is not simply in doing the right thing, it's also in choosing to do it when you could have chosen otherwise. And you'd think a Christian of all people would understand this. Of the 3 people we've spoken about so far, Trent is by far the most grifty. Melonie Mac had a well-established career in the industry before her current tradcon arc. And while DreadRoberts may have falsely appealed to the "it's just fiction bro, who cares" thing, despite not actually believing in it himself, he didn't really go much further than that. But Trent's grifting is on a whole other level. Despite Trent repeatedly appealing to the values of free speech and anti-censorship throughout his more mainstream reporting when it comes to progressive weirdness in video games, during his podcast appearances, he is more than happy to say he actually finds those values immoral.
It's like, I agree with 95%. You said one thing about this other person that I don't like, and it's boom, you're gone, you're cut. And it's like, okay, that's not progression. That's not progressivism. You know, that's not liberal at all.
So I probably, I don't know if we want to get into this, but yeah, I don't think being liberal is like a good thing.
It's not.
Yeah, I think a lot of Enlightenment thinking can be critiqued as well, especially with their embrace of kind of basically hedonism.
Now, I'm not saying that Trent should somehow be barred from holding these political positions. He can believe in whatever he wants. But I am saying that his prior appeals to free speech, in order to get the gamers on his side, was a calculated temporary move. He does not actually align with us. In fact, he is as much an enemy of freedom of expression as the progressives are, and we need to treat him appropriately. In fact, he's so twisted up on his own propaganda that he calls self-censorship an anti-censorship position. Now, to be clear, I have no love for Disney, and I don't care too much about whatever trans storyline is being pulled in this story. The important part here is that what Trent is saying is that censorship in service of his cause is not real censorship. In fact, he stated multiple times that he believes censoring games is a good thing, if they're censoring what he labels degenerate content. It sounds like the ideal Trent world is one in which all media exclusively conforms to Christian morality.
Billy Graham's Bible blaster?
Keep firing! Convert the heathens!
Got him!
No, you just winged him and made him a Unitarian. Look out, Bert! The gentle Baha'i!
Alright, full conversion!
The live and let live morality that I've been mentioning this whole video, where the market decides success. The market simply being people's individual choices about where they spend their money. Yeah, you know what? It turns out Trent doesn't actually agree with that at all.
Capitalism can lead to a lot of this stuff too, when you're kind of elevating the almighty dollar over Christ, and you're putting that ahead.
He calls the market, aka people's individual choices, mob rule, when that mechanism chooses something not in line with his morals. Of course, Trent is retarded once again. A mob rule, or an ochlocracy, is an oppressive majoritarian form of government where the majority pressures or intimidates the minority into compliance. It is a form of democracy, but it's fundamentally different from liberal representative democracy, which has guardrails preventing the majority from infringing on certain rights of the minority. The most famous guardrail in the liberal tradition being the US Constitution. Uber democracy cucks like, for example, Vaush, or any of the other stupid bread tubers, who overvalue democracy for moral reasons, who think that all domains of human life should simply be more democratic a priori. They tend to either oppose or not understand why functioning societies have these limitations on democratic power. Mob rule is not when your preferred candidate loses an election, or when your preferred product doesn't sell well in a market, but it is when one individual gets lynched by a crowd, or when one victim is gangbanged by a group of people. These things are all nominally democratic, but they're also clearly very different. Trent is basically an example of what I described in my Why I Am Not a Libertarian video. Either the libertarian value of liberating people from bonds drives them leftward in pursuit of greater personal freedom, like with my friend Lilith for example, or the rightist value of tradition drives them more authoritarian, after they realize that personal freedom means the freedom to abandon tradition. Trent is an example of the latter. After all, democracy means the people choose, and they might not choose your way.
Got an internship at a political action committee. It was a libertarian organization called Freedom Works. So I was kind of very elevating the market and this idea that the market can like solve all problems, and believe that I was basically worshiping it as a god at the time, not realizing that because I had bought in. I was kind of blinded by what was actually happening.
Again, I'm not saying he can't hold these views. I'm not even saying that you can't critique capitalism, but his argument is that the market mechanism is bad because it doesn't prioritize God over people's individual desires, in the same way that a socialist might reject the market for not prioritizing their own view of perfection. Trent represents the opposite end of the stupidity spectrum that Vaush is on, which is probably why he hates horseshoe theory so much. He's a living embodiment of it. The socialists are incorrect when they say that capitalism is this dictatorial regime, that the market is just a rigged game that the rich use to control the poor. Ironically enough, that is what markets turn into under state socialist regimes. Against all leftist logic, markets are actually an expression of democratic power, of common people making a choice based on their interests, and the sellers of more popular products winning the competition against the sellers of less popular products as a result. However, this is why Trent hates market capitalism, why he calls it mob rule, because markets are a democratizing force, and allowing people the freedom to choose, even when it comes to choosing how they spend their money, means they have the freedom to not choose God. In a straight competition, his ideology inevitably loses. And just so we're clear, yes, Trent, Christianity is an ideology. An ideology is a system of ideals and beliefs that form the basis of economic and political theory and policy. If you want an explicitly Christian government, then Christianity is, for you, not only a faith, but an ideology. This is why, for example, Islamic states are not simply religiously Islamic, but politically Islamic as well. Trent doesn't simply want Christianity in his private life. He thinks it's appropriate to explicitly extend it into the state, which is why for him, it's an ideology. In reply to this assertion, he's posted yet another block quote written by somebody else, where from the Christian point of view, it's not an ideology, because it's a Christ-centered social order, rather than a human-created socio-political solution to all human problems imposed politically. Jesus is badly written. But Christ-centered or not, divinely inspired or a rational belief, either way, if you want a Christian government, if you want Christian law as the law of the state, then it is imposed politically, and it is an ideology. I'm not sure if Trent even reads the nonsense he fucking posts. As we've seen over the course of this entire video, one of the biggest dangers of ideological capture is that ideologues do not view hypocrisy as a moral failing. To progressives, censorship of progressive ideas is bad, while censorship of anti-progressive ideas is good. To the religious right, censorship of Christian ideas is bad, while censorship of anti-Christian ideas is good. These groups aren't principally pro-free speech. They're just pro themselves. And I'm not the only one who's observed this behavior before, especially when it comes to Trent. I was on SmashJT's panel a couple of weeks ago discussing this whole affair, and this one lady came in who I have no idea who she is, I'm sorry dude, but she absolutely hit the nail on the head. She 100% clarified exactly what we'd all been noticing.
You know how long I've been waiting for this moment? I've been waiting for this moment for years. To go at these morality policing religious retards that have been, wolves in sheep's clothing in our community for far too long. It's been a huge issue that I've definitely addressed multiple times. And with Jon F. Trent, he used to be at Bounding Into Comics. He actually fucked up Bounding Into Comics because he can't help himself going in his little religious tirades in an article talking about Spider-Man or whatever have you.
Perspective. Because every now and then I'll hear something and go, okay, he slipped that one in there. And it felt so games journalists, you know what I mean? When they're just like Trump, and I'm like, okay, bro, okay.
Yeah, he can't help himself.
I've been bounding in the comments for a while because of that shit.
Yeah,
same. So the lore is, he left Bounding. I actually know a lot of people at Bounding that are good people. Some of them are even religious, but they choose to be objective in analyzing entertainment. Shout out to them for that. But then there's also good people that do want to talk about straight up entertainment at Bounding, and they're happy to have gotten rid of Jon F. Trent as well as Jon Del Arroz. Now Trent went to That Park Place, and he was on his, usual bullshit there. And then he left That Park Place, and now he's at Phantom Pulse, which Phantom Pulse is ran by Jon Del Arroz, another religious retard in our community that continues to fester. So that's pretty much how things have been going in terms of Jon F. Trent moving around.
I appreciate these extreme stances here.
That's
what they're going to view it as, extreme.
Cassie doesn't really hold back on anything. That's why.
No, I mean, it's not really extreme. It's just they're going to call it extreme, unfortunately.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to say, that Sael guy, I love the way his avatar animates. It's fucking hilarious. So, that is who JF Trent is. He's not really a part of the gaming community. He's a snake who slithered in under the flag of anti-woke solidarity. In fact, he fully admits that in terms of the broader nerd culture, if there even is such a thing, he was a comics kid, not a gamer. And he also fully admits that as he got older, he fell out of comics entirely and became a car and sports dude bro normie instead.
So I was actually what we call a cradle Catholic. So I was born into a Catholic family. I was raised Catholic from as a child, all the way through pretty much through middle school. I went to Catholic school, Catholic elementary school from kindergarten through 8th grade. However, probably towards the end, got really involved in soccer, and soccer pretty much was dominating my life. I was into travel soccer, travel sports, and you go on Sundays. So kind of moved away from practicing my faith during that time. And then obviously went to a public high school. Well, not obviously, but I went to a public high school and definitely became more worldly in those things. And what happens was really had like a lot of culture shock because didn't really know some of the things that were going on. We started kind of getting into comics probably a little bit older than most people. I was reading some of the stuff, probably more adult stuff, I guess. I was reading Cal and things like that, published by Image Comics. And that's really kind of how I started getting into comics. Those were some of my first comics. And then I'm really passionate about is stock car racing. And so I have it's just my name, John F. Trent. So I have my stock car channel too that I've launched too.
Once again, I'm not saying you can't like those things. Those are perfectly fine interests. My point is, he's not a gamer. He's a culture warrior. He views the various interrelated nerd spaces that share some overlap but aren't that connected, like comics and gaming and movies and anime and tabletop and whatever else, as domains to push his ideology. They are not home to him as they might be to you or I. Probably the funniest example of his idiocy for me is when he published that article claiming that Nintendo was going woke because Vivian was made trans in the Paper Mario 1000-Year Door remaster. He cited me on Side-Scrollers, explaining that Vivian is an otakonoko in Japanese, a cross-dressing feminine male, which is not considered to be a trans identity in that culture. However, weirdos in the West do try to push them to be trans. That article's since been deleted, probably because he eventually figured out that even if otakonoko aren't trans, they sure as fuck aren't straight either.
Oh shit, damn, you looking real cute. What's your name?
My name is Felix.
Oh shit. I'm killing myself.
He basically just latches onto any sort of anti-trans narrative he can on the topic of the day, without even thinking it through, because he has a black hole where his brain should be. But most importantly of all, Trent was never anti-censorship. He simply wants to take our spaces and turn them explicitly pro-Christian, censoring non-Christian content in the process, just like the progressives do. And he views our rejection of his moralizing, our defense against his push into our spaces, as an attack on Christianity, which is also just like how the progs take pushback too. This is why in the broader conversation, the woke right is becoming a thing, which by the way, Trent hates being called that too. It's because both the woke left and the woke right, I still hate that label but whatever, they do operate in the same way. They both believe their entire moral code should be forced on all people. They believe any rejection of their views, any impediments to their colonization of a space, as an aggressive attack against them, which justifies further radicalization and expansion. And they don't believe that neutral spaces can truly exist. And even if they could, they shouldn't. Therefore, the defenders of neutrality are the worst sinners, even worse than their open enemies.
I hate these filthy neutrals, Kif. With enemies, you know where they stand, but with neutrals, who knows? It sickens me.
So yeah, Trent's not a woke progressive, but he plays by their handbook, and we should view him the same way. This isn't one of those instances where you can break bread with somebody who has different views than you, because that type of friendly yet adversarial reaction requires at least some recognition of neutrality, and understanding that while you are both opposed, you still respect each other's domains, and you don't need to fight. Trent is not that person. He views interacting with people who are different from him as either an opportunity to attack or to convert. Other people and communities are fodder for his ideology. They're not things to be left alone. There is no reason not to treat Trent like the subversive element that he is. One of the other people that our mystery savior girl here brings up as being in cahoots with Trent in shitting up gaming spaces with their religious moral policing is Jon Del Arroz.
Phantom Pulse is ran by Jon Del Arroz, another religious retard in our community that continues to fester.
I don't gotta haul Dave back out of the closet for another voice in this video, because everything that we've already spoken about applies to Jon Del Arroz. But I will bring Naomi back one last time. Let's return to that final long savvy tweet from before.
This isn't policing, it's respecting what someone created. I invite her to create something new if she seeks to change something. However, Microsoft is going to Microsoft, and if the next update or launch for Halo fails, there's the answer. I'm not saying she can't make something. I'm just saying if she is as unqualified as she looks to be, it's not a good choice, which will lead to a poor product that the market will reject. You, on the other hand, would rather something not be made in the first place. Halo should exist. It should exist as Halo. It should be respected because that's what the original team made. If people seek to change that, then it is bastardizing what exists. Or are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to change Tolkien's works? Or are you fine with all the changes to Marvel characters for the sake of doing it? DEI/ESG and those who believe in it and get hired through it are exhibiting censorship when they don't respect established lore.
Trent might have stopped replying, but Jon tagged in instead, saying, "I thought the goal was for them to stop making degeneracy." He's taken up Trent's position here, not surprising since they work together at Fandom Pulse. He doesn't want to free gaming from woke progressive censorship. He just wants to be the one who decides what gets censored. In fact, pretty much all of his arguments are identical to Trent's. Screaming about sexual content in gaming being degenerate and anti-Christian? Check. Obvious hypocrisy when it comes to his previous Stellar Blade reporting on his channel? Check. Stretching the definition of porn to include basic butt shots or upskirt angles that show no genitalia, while at the same time cheering on other butts that people find attractive anyway? Check. I don't even understand how this retard has a brain. Like on December 23rd, he mocked the idea of Vee thinking that a pretty woman in a leotard is porn. But 5 days earlier on the 18th, he called Zenless Zone Zero, allowing an upskirt camera angle on girls who mainly wear pants, porn. He's doing that subversive definition stretching thing that Melonie Mac does, but he's not even being consistent with his new definition, because he simply wants to beat other people into compliance with it. Listen, the bounding into comics guy spreading around the fake nude of Melonie Mac, yeah, that was a shit move. But the fact that you're apparently dancing on bounding into comics' grave over what? This tiny downtick of viewers over the course of, what is this, a 3-day period or some shit? Because you religious puritanical retards were drummed out of that site for shitting it up with your moralizing nonsense? Yeah, it just sounds like you guys are petty and desperate.
Yeah. So I haven't really talked about this at all, really. But so as I mentioned earlier, the company that I previously sold it to came under new management in October. And in November, I was informed that they were going to be taking the site in a different direction editorially. And I decided to resign at that point and have joined That Park Place. And I'm now the editor-in-chief at That Park Place.
Just in case it's not completely clear what my stance is here, guys, just because I'm anti-left does not make me pro-right. The religious Christian censor pigs do belong in the same camp as the woke progressive censor pigs. And anyone who's gone through this song and dance before like I have, saw this backstab coming a mile away. I guess there's only one final question to ask. Why is this all happening now? Why didn't they pull out their crucifix-branded knives during the Stellar Blade situation, considering just how much insane Coomer bait that game has in it? Well, once again, the boring answer is, I think, the correct one. It's just real politics. Trump won the 2024 election. For a lot of right-leaning people, that has brought ease to their minds. In their view, the country's been sinking for the past 4 years, and now the ship is going to be righted once again. Regardless of whether or not that's actually true, what matters is that the rightoids believe it's true. When the Stellar Blade discourse was at its peak, Trump's victory was far from assured. The progressives might have been losing culturally, but certainly not electorally, not yet. And people are keenly aware of the impact that various subcultures have on the wider culture. The right-wingers probably held their tongue to keep the centrists, moderates, and apolitical people on side. Recall what I said back at the start of the video. Politics is largely in-group preference. If you have right-wing friends who treat you well on a personal level, you are more likely to vote right-wing. It's as simple as that. The ascendancy of the right in the past decade can be partially blamed on the left purity testing everyone out of their spaces. But now that Trump has won, the centrists and moderates and apoliticals are no longer needed.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
The bridges the rightoids had built with them were useful, but now it serves their purposes to burn those bridges. Purity spirals do have a valid function, or else the left wouldn't do it. It's a part of consolidating power after you've grasped it. Once you're on the throne, you have to cut the fat, and keep only the most loyal supporters. If you want more details on this, read the Dictator's Handbook. Or hell, just watch CGP Gray's videos on the topic. Understanding this explains everything. In actual politics, the MAGA people have switched from, we're a big tent, we represent America, the common man, to screaming that no deals can be cut. All non-MAGA supporters need to be purged or primaried out. In the dating or gender space online, you've got legitimate misogynists, the hardcore red pillars, declaring that married men who love their wives and kids, pursuing traditional family units and family values, these things are actually cucked and beta and soy and Reddit and leftist, which I recently covered in my Wife Jack video. And here in gaming, it's Christians versus gamers. There are other subcultures where this has been happening too. And if I do ever actually get around to that James Lindsay Woke Right video, maybe I'll go over them in that. But for people like Smash or Savvy, people who are not hardcore ideologically possessed, pure committed Trump dicksuckers, but who still nominally supported Trump because they didn't like Biden or Kamala, basically, to the right wing, their usefulness ran out. I'm not denigrating you two for who you voted for. I don't like Trump, but your vote is your vote, guys. That's your right. But to the actual ruling coalition, the ideological support structure, the drivers of messaging and thought in the various cultural spaces online, you guys were used by them, and now that you're no longer useful, you're being discarded by them. The time of tactical live and let live is over. They are now moving in on your neutral spaces. In case you think this is somehow me simping for the left, no, those fuckers do this too whenever the pendulum swings back. I've got no love for them either. They're not innocent. But currently, it's the right wing that is actually doing it. The right wing is not your friend. The tradcons were always waiting to let the mask slip and turn on you. And now that they're both culturally and politically ascendant, expect more pushes for censorship to come out of your fair weather friends in the coming years, not less.
Titan has freed us!
Oh, I wouldn't say free. More like under new management.
Trump's electoral victory is one big reason this all kicked off in the past few weeks, but it's not the only reason. There's a second, less important but more personal reason. It seems to be the case that the three main people we've spoken about today came to their extremist version of religion after suffering a personal tragedy of some kind. I'm not going to mock them for what happened or anything like that. However, understanding context is important. And yes, this entire section will be my own opinion. I fully admit I'm doing some armchair psychologizing here. It seems like DreadRoberts found God after losing a child. And considering the little bits that I know about him, which I admit isn't much, to me it feels like he's basically just holding on to that thread of hope of an afterlife. It's no secret that Melonie Mac grew up in a small-town religious household that her younger self found to be kind of stifling, and she managed to move out, move on, and make it with a legitimate career in the industry. She's been public about this many times in the past. She was dating a Twitch streamer, Awesome Joey, for a few years before they got married. That marriage ended abruptly after 11 months, after he apparently cheated on her. Melonie ended up moving back in with her parents back in her hometown, and she's since leaned hard into her old religious views, almost following the patterns of an addict relapsing back into their old unhealthy behaviors. And as far as I can tell, Trent hasn't made any sort of tragedy public, but he did give a basic overview of his life's course from his now Catholic perspective. His high school and college years were very, as he puts it, secular focused, until he met the woman who would eventually become his wife, who was way more religious than him, and then some unexplained real-life events caused him to find his faith again.
Traveled a worldly kind of route until I met my now wife, and she was a she was a Christian, but she was not a Catholic. She was probably described herself as a Baptist, and kind of really brought me back to Christianity, and through some other events in my life returned back to the Catholic Church, and have been practicing my faith as a Catholic for probably the past 3-4 years now.
This sounds like it could be something tragic, but he doesn't really get into it. Interestingly enough, in this 2024 interview, Trent says that 3 to 4 years ago is when he returned to religion. And back in this 2020 interview, you can actually notice the change in his demeanor. He's not stuffing Christian talking points into the conversation constantly. He's actually discussing the topic. Trent really has just morphed into a puppet of religious ideology over the years. Anyway, without knowing any more about his personal situation, and I'm not going to dig too much, and with observing his truly grotesque behavior over the past few years, I am comfortable simply viewing Trent as just a cancel pig that should be ignored and discarded. But for DreadRoberts and Melonie Mac, I do have some sympathy. When your life falls apart, people tend to grasp at whatever keeps their head above water. This is a pretty common human experience. Psychological research shows that new converts to a system of belief are stricter adherents than people who have done it all their lives, especially if they converted over during the midst of hitting rock bottom. Basically, when everything around you is collapsing, and along comes a system that has prescriptions, and if you follow them, things do measurably improve for you, people will generally latch onto it during times of crisis. Whether that be religion or political ideology or something more mundane like martial arts. If it's communal, provides structure, and offers a clear path of advancement with real benefits to sticking to it, well, any system like that is pretty much what a person needs during a crisis. Melonie in particular, since I knew her in passing from years ago. I don't like what she's become, but I do kinda get it, you know? Oh yeah, there's also Jon Del Arroz. I almost forgot about him. He really is kind of an afterthought. The main reason that he and Trent are doing the fandom pulse thing together is because, as our cool female hero chick pointed out on Smash's panel, they just stopped being tolerated in the other sites they were a part of. I don't know enough about Jon to know if he's motivated by a personal tragedy, but I do know that he deflects all criticism of his actions by claiming that he's being persecuted for being a Latino Trump voter, and also his wife got a restraining order against him for domestic violence. So maybe he's just a bag of shit. However, beyond Trump's victory making cultural inroads less valuable, and personal tragedy driving religious conversions, there is one final cause to discuss, and this one is about the philosophy of censorship. Let's return to that third debate between Trent and Savvy, and really try to understand what's going on here. In deciphering this problem, I'm going to mainly be leaning on Sir Bernard Williams' book, Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy, his magnum opus. The following example regarding overlapping moral systems is pulled pretty much directly from his work. Do you remember when Savvy said the market will dictate success? The idea that people should be free to choose what they want to spend their money on? Well, we already know that Trent doesn't value people's individual choices if they choose a path other than God. He's got specific moral prescriptions on what is and is not acceptable artwork that goes beyond simple popularity or profitability. He may have temporarily aligned with gamers on anti-woke issues, but freedom of expression is not actually what he wants. Ultimately, although I align with Savvy's position almost one-to-one here, Trent basically won the debate because he understood that the liberal live and let live morality is not the absence of morality, but rather a moral code in and of itself, something that Savvy seems to not be aware of. I don't blame her for this, it's a pretty common error, and I fell into this trap a whole bunch during the 2010s too. I described this phenomenon in a previous video years ago, but I don't even remember which one it is, so I might as well just give you a refresher. Let's say that this grid represents all possible moral positions. In this hypothetical universe, only 9 moral positions exist. Now let's say that religion A views moral positions 1, 2, and 3 as moral, and moral positions 4 through 9 as immoral. A competing faith, religion B, views moral positions 1, 4, and 7 as moral, and all others as immoral. The two religions agree that moral position 1 is a moral action. Moral positions 5, 6, 8, and 9 are immoral actions, and they disagree on 2, 3, 4, and 7. If you were tasked to create a code of ethics to govern members of both religions in the same jurisdiction under the same set of rules, well, you have a few options here. One is that the rules that apply to all are made to be maximally permissive. The rules allow anyone to do actions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, while disallowing actions 5, 6, 8, and 9. Those 4 everyone agrees are immoral, so no one can do them. And if you do those things, you will be punished by society. Everyone agrees that action 1 is moral, so there's no problem. But the remaining 4 actions, the rules state that anyone can do. And the enforcement of the specific morality of the two religions, with regards to those final 4 actions, is left to social pressure within those communities. The other option is that the rules are minimally permissive. This time, if either religion bans an action, it's banned for everyone. This leaves action 1 as the only moral action. In the first example, each religion simply has to accept that members of the other religion will do things they find to be immoral. In the second example, both religions will have to accept not being allowed to do things that they think are moral in order to not upset the other religion. The third option is to negotiate, mix and match. Maybe religion A gives up action 3 in exchange for access to action 2, and religion B gives up action 7 in exchange to access to action 4. This middle route leaves everyone unsatisfied, but at least they all have a bit more to do than the minimally permissive route, and they all have to tolerate a little bit less than the maximally permissive route. In case it's not clear, the overarching code of ethics that the two different religions have to live under is the law, and the particular edicts of the two religions are just the private moral codes of various ethnic and religious communities in a multicultural society. Either each community has self-governance, which some breakaway radicals truly do want. You know, a Christian nation for Christians only, a white nation, a black nation, whatever. Or everyone exists together under a universal standard of law, which is the case right now. And so that law must permit at least some actions that one community may find offensive, but other communities accept as normal. Someone who holds that very normal, quasi-liberal, quasi-libertarian, live and let live point of view, like Madame Savvy, or held deep down in my heart, like me, we look at these choices and we say, clearly the maximally permissive option is the best one, right? In this case, everyone is free to do any of these permitted choices, and the moral prescriptions of whether or not you should do them is left up to private communal morality. In other words, the law shouldn't stop you from doing actions 2, 3, 4, or 7, but your community's moral code will inform you of what you should do. And if somebody else in some other community is doing 4, when you or your guys wouldn't do 4, that's fine. It's none of your business. No one's forcing you to do it. Live and let live, man. However, the problem with this liberal position is that it simply assumes the best universal law to cover multiple different moral systems living under one jurisdiction is the maximally permissive one. And liberals make that assumption because being maximally permissive is a part of liberal morality, meaning that it's not an absence of morality like it first appears, but is instead a positive moral claim itself.
Boy, if you don't...
It's tough to wrap your head around this if this is your first time encountering the idea, so I'll lay it out like this. A liberal views the maximally permissive universal law as the ideal way for people with different moral codes to coexist in one space. And that's probably true, but only if those different people agree that there should be a clean divide between the amoral public domain and the moral heavy private domain. But that is itself a moral claim. If those people don't agree that the split between the public and private should exist, in fact, if they find the existence of that split to be immoral itself, then they certainly will not abide by it, and if they're forced to, they will view themselves as being oppressed. The problem here is that liberal morality is pretty much the only moral system that really sticks up for that public-private split. The most well-known example of this in action is the separation of church and state.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him, or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace.
Though this isn't a uniquely liberal idea, some socialists and fascists also abide by it. The difference is that despite lacking religion, these philosophies still have moral codes that must be imposed on all. The socialists? No, their whole thing is that the wealth of society should be collectivized for all to share. Their utopia requires a complete deconstruction of the concept of privacy, which is why so many critiques of socialism point out that it's not just your material wealth, but your body, your being, that will also be public property. The fascists? Same thing as the socialists, really, but only more honest. In their writing, they explicitly call for the private sphere of life to be abolished. And as for religions, they obviously have moral codes that must be imposed on all as well. Muslims want Sharia law to be the law of the land. Christians hate the division between church and state. Pick any religion, and you'll discover among its most die-hard adherents that they don't respect the public-private split. That's what Trent was getting at earlier with this post, by the way. The whole privatization of Christianity must end thing. He wants the division between public and private life to be destroyed, and for Christianity to consume it all.
Jesus wanted me to give you this.
Whoa! This is the trap that Savvy has fallen into, and that I fell into as well a whole bunch over the years. I think most children of the modern world don't see this coming. The liberal live and let live market morality, the split between the public and private domains, has been so ridiculously successful for our civilization that we've been raised to simply see it as normal, natural. We take it for granted. Hasn't it always been this way? Of course this is how it is. It's obviously good. But liberal morality is not the absence of morality. It is an imposition of morality, like each of the previous examples. However, this time, the imposition is of a maximally permissive morality onto people who may not share permissiveness as a value. Just like how a Muslim or a Christian may impose chastity onto you, even though you may not share that value. And if you're a liberal and you say, well, clearly permissiveness is better than chastity, okay, but you're already making that moral judgment from within your own liberal frame. We don't even conceive of it as being a moral position that can be rejected by some different moral code. Doesn't it accommodate all moral codes? Well, that's the problem. Many of these other moral codes don't want to be accommodated. They want to rule. They view the maximally permissive universal law as an imposition against them because it prevents them from imposing their morals on others. This might be getting too abstract, so I'll show you a real-world example. And the best one that I've discovered of this conversation playing out is when Destiny debated the Muslim activist, Daniel Haqiqatjou. I don't know how to pronounce that name.
Islamic law requires a governmental authority for all these punishments that you're talking about regarding gays, regarding I as a Muslim, according to the strictest interpretation of Sharia law, I can't go and just kill someone because they're violating Islamic law.
So you're telling me that in Islamic communities, there is absolutely no form of penance or punishment that can exist that isn't delivered by a government?
No.
There is no form of religious discipline in Islam that can't be carried out without a government oversight.
According to Islam, or the reality right now?
The reality in Muslim communities across the world.
The reality in communities, Muslim communities across the world, they are under a liberal system, whether it's a liberal government in charge, like in Egypt with Abdul Fattah Sisi, or Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman, liberals, or any other Muslim country. You cannot apply Islamic law because you have these liberal dictatorships that prevent that. Look at Brunei. Look at the small country of Brunei in Southeast Asia.
I'm not talking about Brunei.
They wanted to apply Islamic law when it comes to sexual fornication, extramarital affairs, and yes, homosexuality. They got slammed by all liberals all over the world. The US was calling for sanctions. They introduced legislation into Congress to condemn Brunei in order to condemn this small Muslim country that got it into their heads that they could somehow practice Islam. Nowhere in the world is Islam being practiced and Sharia law being practiced because it's not allowed to happen. The liberal order cracks down.
So I agree that there are liberal governments that protect fundamental or basic freedoms that your religion might seek to infringe upon. I would consider that a positive. You're going to say, well, no, actually, Sharia law is resisted all over the world in liberal societies because we don't let Muslims murder gay people. I guess I'll bite the bullet on that one and say, okay, well, in that case, I'm okay with liberalism as being authoritative over Islam because I like to defend fundamental human rights among other groups of people.
In these Muslim countries, like Pakistan is an example, a very traditional Muslim country, now because of the pressure of liberal human rights in international law, they have introduced all kinds of marriage laws that affect family law within Pakistan. So things like triple divorce, triple talaq, things like different inheritance laws, things like
ages of the brides for the
things like ages of brides, all of these things
Probably
are now being
things,
imposed. So
but,
Muslims cannot practice
marrying 12-year-olds.
I
think we should be coercive to other countries to respect fundamental human rights. I do agree with that.
The human rights regime is a liberal regime.
If it's liberal to not want children to be forced into sex slave marriages or to not have certain people
What sex slave marriages? What are you talking about?
What is the youngest age do you think it's acceptable in Islam to marry a bride?
In Islam, you can marry, you can consummate the marriage at puberty.
Okay, so I would be probably against that in a lot of countries. So like an 11 or 12-year-old girl.
On the basis of what? Liberalism? Or this is just
Sure,
destiny?
we'll call it liberalism. Sure.
It is liberalism.
We'll call it, if you'd like to call it, I think you're selling short your own religion by saying that respecting some basic fundamental human values or right to autonomy or right to be free of oppression or rape or whatever. If you want to call that liberalism, then I guess, sure. But.
No, it's like, what's wrong with, so this is something that is in Islam.
Would you say that slavery should exist as it flourished under Muslim majority societies for so long? Do you think that we should bring that back as well?
Slavery as a practice has a rational basis. It has a moral basis.
Okay.
What's being said here is that even if the morality of liberal democratic capitalist Western countries like America is very live and let live, Islamic morality has certain prescriptions that cannot be enforced when Islamists are living in a liberal society. The Islamic moral prescriptions of preventing women from leaving their husbands, or killing gay people for degenerate sexual practices, or child marriages. These are things that liberals must prevent Islamists from implementing in order to ensure the live and let live liberal moral system exists. In other words, Islamic morality considers it to be a good thing to oppress people in ways that a liberal might find distasteful. And so the liberal must proactively oppress the Islamist by preventing him from oppressing gay people or something. The obvious liberal reply to this is, you wanted to impose on other people first, so it's good that we impose on you and stop you. But that only matters if, once again, the other side views aggression as a moral evil in and of itself. Liberals do. That's why we have self-defense rights. And the libertarians' non-aggression principle came out of the liberal tradition. But that blanket non-aggression for all is not a principle found in Islam. In Islam, the moral code says that it's good to aggressively oppress gay people, and it's bad to prevent Muslims from oppressing them. Their aggression is good, your aggression is bad. It sounds hypocritical to us, but that's because we view hypocrisy as a moral failing. That is not a part of their moral code.
You got me.
Obviously, the people on the other side of Goonergate aren't Islamic extremists. As Christian radicals, they will have more overlap with us than the Islamists do, but that's mainly due to cultural similarity. Christian moral prescriptions will be more like liberal ones than Islamic ones, because liberalism came out of Christianity. All are equal before God became all are equal before the law. But nonetheless, fundamentalist Christianity has some demands that liberals must object to, like for example, censoring sexual content in media targeted towards adults, which is what kicked this whole thing off in the first place. It's at this point that liberal morality must proactively defend itself, not as the absence of morality, but as a moral system itself, or else it will fall prey to other moral systems. Savvy lost the debate with Trent because she didn't fully understand that Trent doesn't want to coexist with people like her, where he can have his Christian morals in his domain and she can enjoy her hentai or whatever in her domain. No, Trent views her domain as a place to be conquered in the name of God, not respected as different spheres of influence. He views Savvy as an obstacle to either be converted or destroyed. Appealing to the liberal values of peace and coexistence does not work when you're confronted with an enemy who doesn't want those things. And appealing to non-aggression frankly doesn't work either. Saying you started it makes no difference to them, because from their point of view, they're good, you're evil. Why shouldn't they start it? All of what we've been talking about so far is what Trent pejoratively calls moral relativism. It's his go-to reply to any live and let live position. Let's return to the two religions example. Assume religion A is Christianity, Trent's moral code, and religion B is some other faith. Trent would simply say, obviously what religion A says is good should be the law, and what it says is evil should be illegal. We don't need to consider the desires of religion B. We should oppress them until they convert, or leave, or if necessary, destroy them. And that exercise of trying to find an overlapping moral code, that's just moral relativism. Why should we consider religion B's moral code at all? And from his point of view, Trent is correct here. By his code, they're simply immoral, and that's that. But to dig into this, we have to understand what moral relativism is. Moral judgments are true or false only relative to an ideal. The Bible lays out its moral code. It's an ideal for human behavior, and the more that your behavior aligns with the ideal behavior, the more that you can be judged as moral, while the less you align with it, the more you can be judged as immoral. Moral absolutism says that moral judgments are true or false relative to one ideal, usually their preferred one, and this ideal applies to all times and places and peoples, regardless of culture or location or historic era. Moral relativism says that moral judgments are true and false relative to a particular standpoint that is viewed as ideal. But many different societies have different ideals, and no one standpoint is uniquely privileged over others. Trent is a moral absolutist. He rejects moral relativism because other societies' ideas of morality are focused on a different standpoint than he is. To Trent, there's only one moral standpoint, God's, and all actions can be judged on how in alignment they are with the one ideal. And as we talked about earlier, when you go down the moral relativism road, there are some truly awful scenarios that crop up. Like, for example, if a society views rape as moral. It doesn't feel good to go, well, it's just their culture, man, we can't judge them. But there's also obvious problems with moral absolutism as well. If you don't believe in Trent's standpoint, if you reject his moral prescriptions, and instead you believe in your own standpoint, with your own moral prescriptions, then you have to either isolate from each other or fight until one of you dominates the other and forces them to conform. I've been using Williams's ideas for this whole thing, but it's probably best to finally quote from him directly. Williams lays out the difference between thick and thin moral concepts. A thin moral concept is what we might call a universal morality, or at least a morality as universal as you can get. Every culture on Earth has a moral concept that says, don't kill people without a good reason. They might differ wildly in what constitutes a good reason, but nonetheless, there is a prohibition on wanton killing as a human universal. For Williams, this is a thin moral concept because it can be stretched out across all of these different cultures. In our simplified overlapping morals example, moral action 1 is a thin moral concept because both religions agree that it's moral. The issue is, morality is supposed to be about good and bad ways to live your life, and there's very little moral knowledge about how to live your life contained in thin moral concepts. The don't kill commandment doesn't tell you very much beyond don't kill people. It is a universal rule, but it's also of little help. Contrast this with a thick moral concept. Thick concepts are local to a moral code. They're not universally believed to be good across all peoples, even if their believers may want to impose them on all peoples. In our example, actions 2, 3, 4, and 7 are thick morals. One religion says that they're good, the other one says they're not. When Christians say you should go to church on Sundays, that is a thick moral concept. The Christian ideal is that all people would go to church on Sundays, that all people would be Christians. But in the real world, not everyone believes it's good to go to church on Sundays. Some people just don't care, like atheists, while some people think that it's bad, like Muslims, who have their own thick morality of going to mosque on Fridays, which the Christians think is bad. These morals are particular, not universal. Williams puts forward a thesis in the book that moral relativism is a phenomenon caused by the act of reflection, of thinking over a moral choice you had to make after the fact. Here's an example. In Islamic morality, if you steal from a shop, they cut off your hand. That's considered the moral thing to do. No one would blink an eye at it. Here in the West, while we do want to punish thieves, we generally view chopping the hand off of a thief as being too extreme a punishment for the crime. So here's our moral question. What do we do with thieves? And we have two different moral codes with two different answers. One says cut off their hand, the other says arrest them and make them pay a fine or spend some time in jail, depending on various factors. Now let's say that you're a judge and you've just slapped a thief with a fine. When performing that action, there's no question. You feel moral in the moment. But later on, when you reflect on your actions, you might ask, well, should I have given him a lesser fine, or maybe a greater one? Should I have locked him up instead? Or maybe I should have cut off his hand like the Muslims want. The act of reflection necessarily takes you outside of your own subjective position, and you begin to view your own moral impulses as being equivalent to other moral positions that you might not hold, because a necessary part of comparing your decision to other possible decisions is temporarily viewing your decision as not your own, but as just one choice among many. Williams claims that this act of reflection necessarily destroys moral knowledge, because by taking yourself out of your own shoes, you also exit the standpoint that guided your moral decision. In this way, moral certainty is a form of knowledge that can only subjectively be known. Attempting to be objective means losing access to the knowledge from a subjective position, since you've disentangled yourself from that position. To quote Williams directly, if they think about their earlier beliefs, they will now see them as the observer saw them, as knowledge they do not share. Oh, and by the way, the fundamentalist Christians really should understand this, because it's exactly what God was doing when he became Jesus to experience life as a human, since Christ is both God and the Son of God at the same time. But if there's one lesson about subjectivity that goes right over their heads, it's this one. Trent's moral absolutism is the morality of what Williams calls the hypertraditional society. In the hypertraditional moral code, certain moral practices are taken as true and good, others as false and bad. Other societies with different moral codes are not viewed as good from their point of view, but bad from mine. They are simply viewed as bad, because hypertraditional societies are not capable of engaging in reflection. The people within them do not actually have the ability to step outside of their own shoes and reflect on their actions. They simply act in accordance with their beliefs without any further intellectual examination of what they've done. And yes, as I read through this part of the book, the similarities between my interactions with Trent and the guy who couldn't answer the question, how would you feel if you didn't eat breakfast today, became more and more apparent. Both lack the mental ability to step outside of their own frame. Hyper-traditional morality cannot even recognize relativism, it's simply evil. But without the ability to reflect, which necessarily raises the specter of relativism, hyper-traditional morality is unable to recognize its own true nature. This is why the strictest of believers in any moral code, whether it's a religion or a political ideology or a cult of personality or whatever else, they're often blind to what normal people see as obvious. However, once we've done the reflecting, it's not like we're out of the woods. The specter of relativism is still there. The possibility that we may fall into the pit of anti-morality, where no judgments between right and wrong can be made, and everyone's views are all different and equal, that's still present, and many a nihilist and anarchist have fallen into that gap. The way out of the problem is an understanding that while reflection may destroy moral knowledge, it also gives us access to many other types of knowledge that the absolutist will never truly know, whether that's objective knowledge like scientific knowledge, or knowledge of the moral practices of other cultures. Not their knowledge itself, not their moral certainty, but knowledge of their morals. Relativism can disrupt the ability to be certain in our moral judgments, and that's a problem. But it's also a knowledge-gathering mechanism, and that knowledge can lead us to other moral positions. What this means is that when moral relativism is taken to the extreme, you do get Trent's view of it, where no moral judgments can be made, where you cannot say the rapist is evil because by his personal moral code he's doing a good thing. But Trent incorrectly identifies all moral relativism as this extreme form, because he's an absolutist who lacks the intelligence to step outside of his own position and consider hypothetical alternatives. However, the relativism that honestly examines moral positions gains new knowledge, and then uses that knowledge to generate new moral positions. That is the engine that drives the development of human morality in the first place. The thin moral concepts, like don't kill other people, they became universals through this process of reflection and iteration. There absolutely were societies out there that did allow the wanton killing of people for no reason, and they died out due to their own instability. In much the same way, matriarchies died off, and patriarchies thrived, because the natural environment led to certain divisions of labor being more successful. It's almost like an evolutionary process, where all sorts of weird moral codes sprung up during our early history, but only the most successful ones survived and were passed on. I can't believe I've gone this long talking about human morality without bringing up Haidt, but Haidt is only kind of relevant this time around. His research into the psychology of morality, that different people have a set of different but overlapping moral tastes, the same way that we have different tastes in music or food or entertainment, that describes how individuals feel like a thing is more or less moral. But it's pretty light on the why. Williams does his best to fill in. Humanity's current moral system survived by outcompeting others, and every system contains the thin universal moral concepts because those are absolutely required for humans to function as a group. And we can only come to this understanding through reflection, which requires some level of relativism, but it can't be relativism for relativism's sake. We can't simply deconstruct everything without putting it back together again, which is what progressives always fucking do. You can engage in moral relativism, but it must have a purpose. It must be a knowledge-gathering venture. Flinging yourself down the pit with reckless abandon will do you no good, but you can carefully descend into it prepared, with the intention of discovering its secrets, and if you bring them back up to the surface. Again, this is something the Christians should know about because it's exactly what's happening when Jesus wanders into the desert alone with no earthly support structure and he's tempted by Satan. Nearly every faith, or hell, every hero's journey story has that part where the hero is in isolation, has to conquer what exists beyond, and then bring the spoils back for all to enjoy. I can't believe you fuckers don't even understand your own religion. The Liberal Project is, in a way, an attempt to answer this problem with as little bloodshed as possible by siloing some sections of morality off into the private sphere. Now people can coexist because the thin moral concepts are things that we all agree to abide by, and the thick moral concepts are communal ones. You can practice it in your private community, and we'll do something different over here in our private community. But this only works if all the moral systems involved agree to the split, which is itself a moral proposition. If you're dealing with a moral system which demands universal adherence, then this pacifist solution does not work. At that point, the only thing left is force. Sometimes it's actual force, like real violence. However, to bring us all the way back to the original topic of the video, Goonergate, the gaming thing, since we're talking about cultural spaces here and not physical ones, force in this context means the ability to impose a moral standard across an entire community, regardless of the consent of its members. Progressives currently wear that crown, though they are slowly losing their grasp on it. Christians are desperate to seize it, and that common pacifist liberal position of, just no one sees it, guys, leave it alone, let everyone do what they want, that is just not going to work. Power abhors a vacuum. The solution is not in that pacifist liberalism. It is in what Professor Stephen Hicks calls muscular liberalism.
There are versions of liberalism that start to sound very namby-pamby, and these are going to be the more free-floating, rationalistic versions of liberalism that you are worried about, and I also worry about. And they are so concerned with saying we need to respect other people's freedoms that I can never even criticize other people. And so from that intellectual context, then you're going to get into a paradox of tolerance. But my response to that from within the liberal tent is to say that liberalism needs to be muscular, if I can use that metaphor. Once you have said individuals matter, individuals have rights, and that these rights are absolute, then you empower government to protect those rights. Then that government needs to be muscular in the protection of those rights. So, just as we say, for example, any sort of murdering is wrong. It violates the right to life. Kidnapping and enslaving are wrong. Theft is wrong. So, life, liberty, and property. The government should be empowered to whatever degree necessary to use force effectively in the service of those three rights. So the point of the so-called paradox of tolerance is to say pretty much anything that is voluntary and peaceful is going to be tolerated. And so it is going to be a largely contentious, messy society, and there's going to be a lot of value conflicts and so on. And we're going to try to resolve those as much as we possibly can through voluntary mechanisms. But when we are clearly dealing with someone who is not interested in doing that, they are inserting force into the equation, then the police come down hard on those.
But that's not what's happening.
Okay, and that is not, so that's the second part of it. Why is that not happening? And it's not because liberalism is not saying we shouldn't protect people's liberty rights, or we should allow assassination and killing and kidnapping and so forth. It's the third contenders who are both anti-liberal in their core, in their origin, and they're significantly now part of the society. And we have let a lot of them in, and a significant number of the more intellectually sophisticated have captured certain institutions. So what we then have to say is the healthy form of conservatism, the healthy form of liberalism, we face a common enemy, which is the illiberal versions of various other things.
Hicks is advocating for a form of liberalism that recognizes itself as a positive set of morals that must be proactively put forth into the world and protected by its adherents. This means that liberals cannot leave the crown on the ground after it falls from the progressive's head. We must take it and wear it and use it to enforce a neutral space, to enforce the public-private split, to enforce the live and let live market morality. And we must be willing to punish those who seek to use the walled garden that we build to destroy it from within. This means that while we do honor those live and let live values of free speech and free association, when a woke progressive or a religious fundamentalist or whoever else decides to view those values as weakness, tries to use them to undermine our entire moral system, then they have lost the protection of that system, and we should act accordingly. Now that we have at least a little bit of understanding of some of the underlying philosophy here, let's zoom back into the specific event at play. Goonergate, the live and let live normies clashing with the censor degeneracy rightoids. Armed with our new knowledge, the nature of this conflict is suddenly a lot more clear. These two sides are speaking different moral languages, and the normie side does not recognize what kind of conversation they're in. They think they're talking about the boundaries of a free speech zone, but the rightoids have no intention of creating or honoring any such zone. To them, the idea of a free speech space is unclaimed territory, ripe for planting a flag into and turning towards their ideology. The defense against this entire thing is rooting out the snakes in our midst. Our answer to them should be the same as our answer to progressives, whose games keep flopping and studios keep closing. Vote with your wallet. Don't give them money, don't give them time, don't give them clicks. Get woke, go broke? Well, that applies to the woke right as well. As the pendulum swings back, as these various spheres move away from woke nonsense, and as the right becomes culturally dominant once again, they will try to do what the progressives have done. Some of them might even succeed, and we will have to oppose them in the same way, for the same reason, with the same level of energy. I'm pretty hopeful about all this, though. Gamers are in fact rejecting calls to censor from the more hardline right-wing people. Just because they may have once been aligned on woke stuff, or they might have voted the same way in the election or whatever else, doesn't mean that this was anything more than a temporary alliance, just like in Gamergate 1. If you actually want to preserve that neutral space, your free market of artwork and ideas, your live and let live morality, then you need to be proactively liberal. Not leftist, but liberal. You need to say no to both the Christians and the progressives, and to any other moral busybody that might come along. You have to tell them, no, I don't care if you think that I'm bigoted or if I'm sinful. Fuck you. Your morals aren't mine, and they have no place in this space. And if that means you burn bridges with cancel pigs, then that's how it has to be. Regardless of the sins of the left, and there are many, the right wing is not a friend to gamers, and they never truly were. Alright my friends, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you for watching all the way through. Another big project complete. If only there wasn't, you know, a dozen more to do. I'll get through them though. I know there's been a lot of nonsense about me floating around on the internet recently. It's all pretty much made up, by the way. Completely false bullshit. And I will address it in the coming weeks. But for now, I just want to say, for those of you who are here, thank you very much for sticking with me. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching the videos, watching the streams, donating when you can. It all helps keep things going. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you look forward to the next one. I will see you then, guys. Have a good one. I love you.
Who can argue, possibly, that, you know, Luke Skywalker meets Debbie Does Dallas is a good thing? It's not. It's just not good. And I'm definitely not going to let Mass Effect in my house.
All those things with MA on the back, mature audiences.
And then the thing is once it's in the house, that's the thing. There's a lot of grown men that love video games. Let's be honest here. But once it's in the house, we live in a day and age where our children are not always supervised. It's not the days of the Playboy magazine when a lot of moms were at home for the majority of the day. Many kids let themselves in after school. They have time. What do you think a young boy's gonna do? I wanna play my dad's video game while he's not here. And I think that's dangerous. We really have to watch this.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it didn't get an adults-only rating. That's the highest rating that it can have. So first of all, this board that rates them needs to have their head examined. And this made me feel old watching this. What happened to Atari and Pinball and Pac-Man?
Well, you know, this is an incredibly sophisticated. I mean, it's like watching a full feature film, basically. I mean, it's incredibly sophisticated.
But we have to be careful here. Let's face it. There's all kinds of bad stuff coming through the internet, through video games.